Right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the first, actually, I was going to say protection masterclass, but actually not. These aren't masterclasses now. These are our build events. So specifically focused on a particular topic with a number of speakers. My name's Christian. I head up the advisor support team here within the Verve Group, and I'm going to be hosting this morning. We've got sorry, excuse the pinging. It's because everyone's currently joining the session. So I've been warned that that's going to happen whilst people join. 3 sessions this morning. We are joined by Gregor from Royal London, who is very kindly going to take us through the first session, which is mastering the meteorite. Really like the phrase there. I'm then going to take you through the second session, which is what makes for a good protection file. Funnily enough, there is a common theme this morning, which is consumer duty. So hopefully giving people a little bit of insight onto consumer duty and how that impacts protection advice, not just the wealth side of things. And then we're joined by Royal London, who are going to look at estate planning and how protection policies can be used for estate planning. There are 130 something people signed up for this morning, so sadly we're not going to be able to open up and have this as the most interactive of sessions in terms of conversations. The chat room, chat box, whatever you want to call it, is most definitely open. Please ask any questions you've got as we go through. I'll be keeping an eye on those. Anything that I think I can answer in the chat, then I'll do so. Anything I think we need to talk about collectively, if I think it's appropriate at the time, Gregor, as long as you're okay, I'll give you a little interruption, wave my hand, do something, or we can save it for the end. There will be a Q&A session at the end of every session. There'll be a 10-minute break in between each session as well, so time to stretch the legs, get a coffee, all the rest of it. But I just want to make sure that people can hear me. If someone can wave a hand or say something to make sure that I'm working, and then Gregor making sure that everything's working on your side.
I can hear you loud and clear, Christian, and hopefully
Super. I can hear you as well, which makes sense then. Brilliant. I'm going to leave you to it. I'm going to turn my camera off, but obviously I'm here and I'll keep an eye on the chat. So we'll see you in a bit.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Christian, for that really warm welcome there, and a massive welcome to everyone for joining us this morning. It's hopefully going to be a really productive morning, hopefully a really interesting session, a couple of sessions today. I know you've got a few speakers today, and we're kicking off with a little look at this session all around mastering the meteorite, and I'll explain why I've called it mastering the meteorite in a second. But I suppose just following on from that introduction, I'm Gregor Sked. I'm one of Royal London's protection development and technical managers. So really, we're here to help support you and your protection business and your protection conversations, and hopefully that's what we're going to try and instill throughout the next 45 or so minutes today. So why have I called the session today Mastering the Meteorite? Well, I think quite simply put, the consumer duty regulation that is only a matter of months away from implementation really is going to be quite significant. It is going to be quite meteoric, and it is going to be quite industry changing. I don't want that to put fear in anybody, because actually what I wanted to do today is take a look at how the consumer duty presents us with a huge, even meteoric sized opportunity to hopefully talk protection and really put protection on our agendas. And I think it really is impossible to look ahead into 2023 without recognizing the significant impact that this regulation is going to have. As I say, it's only a matter of months away from implementation. It lands January time, and it is really going to touch all aspects of financial services, whether it's advisors, investment groups, maybe product providers like Royal London, and platform services as well. It is really going to change how we approach customers and really customer outcomes. So little of an introduction there. I really want to take a look at what we're going to hopefully instill in you all over the next 45 minutes. And really, there's 3 things that I want you to take away from today's session. So be able to understand, firstly, what exactly the consumer duty is and why it's been brought forward from the FCA. Have an understanding of what the new rules are and what it means for advisors like yourselves. know some of the next steps to take to help prepare for the consumer duty. And also another one that's not actually really mentioned there is how can Royal London help you prepare for consumer duty? And we're going to do that through a whole different matter of points that we're going to look at over the next, I said, 45 minutes. And there's lots of different areas that we want to touch on. So we're going to do a bit of a recap as to what exactly the consumer duty is. What is this opportunity? Why do I keep telling people that there's a massive opportunity to be had with consumer duty? Take a look at some of the key dates. We are kind of halfway through pretty much the implementation plan, but from the FCA. We're going to take a look at some feedback that we've received from advisors that are feeding back into what exactly they found that the consumer duty might mean for them. We'll talk about building your own consumer duty roadmap. We're going to talk really quite a lot about what the role protection plays in all of this, and again, where can we support you at Royal London. So I think without further ado, let's just get straight into the session today. Now, I want to pose a little question to everybody. You don't have to shout out, you don't have to put it in the chat box, but just have a little think about it. When you hear the phrase consumer duty, how do you feel? Which one of these faces would you say best represents you when you hear when we hear anybody talking about consumer duty? Do you think, are you on the left hand side there? Are you that green face? You think, excellent, this is a great thing. This is going to mean some really positive changes for maybe me and the industry. Are you maybe in the middle? Maybe you're on the fence. Maybe you think you'll just deal with what comes when it comes. Or are you on the right hand side here? Maybe if you're of the belief that this is bad, this is not going to be good, this is going to have the FCA breathing down our neck. Or maybe you have no idea what I'm on about. Maybe you've got no clue what I'm referring to when I talk about consumer duty. And hopefully that's not the case. Hopefully everybody has had some insight or some contact with consumer duty. It has been a talking point quite significantly for the last couple of years. So hopefully we're all not sitting on that right-hand side box there. What I want everyone to be thinking by the end of the session today is actually this is a great bit of regulation. This is actually something to look at as business stimulation rather than regulation. We'll hopefully all be thinking that we're that green face on the left-hand sides. But I think it's quite important just to remind ourselves what exactly the consumer duty is. And if we are maybe on that side where we don't really know what it is and we're not entirely sure what it means, what exactly is coming into force? Well, the consumer duty has really been introduced by the FCA to try and bring in higher standards and expectations on the firms that they regulate. And the FCA are really using this as a way to try and enhance consumer protection in the retail markets. A lot of people are calling this the biggest shakeup in financial services in at least the last 15 years. And it's not really completely revolutionary. Bit of controversial statement there, but actually what it really does is it builds on a lot of the existing rules around treating customers fairly and some of the senior management and certification regime regulations as well. But who's it aimed at? Well, to be honest, it doesn't really matter if you're a mortgage advisor, a protection specialist, a wealth advisor, or even if you're a platform provider like or a product platform provider or a product provider, I should say, like Royal London. You know, we all need to some extent examine what exactly the impacts of consumer duty is going to have. We are going to all have to look at our processes and how we engage with customers to help them achieve good outcomes. And you've probably seen this pyramid at some point over the last couple of years. This is a nice succinct way of looking at exactly what the consumer duty consists of. And really there are three parts to the consumer duty. We've got right at the top, we've got the consumer principles. We've got a brand new principle and part of the principles for business. Previously there were 11. This one is now going to take us up to 12. So excellent news for anybody sitting RO1 anytime soon. Now, the consumer principle states that firms must act to deliver good outcomes for retail customers. Now remember, it is these principles for business that are ultimately fundamental obligations for all authorised firms. And actually, because the higher standard of conduct that the FCA are bringing in with Principle 12, where Principle 12 applies, the existing Principle 6, which is we have to pay due regard to customers and treat them fairly, and also Principle 7, which is communications with customers have to be fair, clear and transparent, actually won't apply because Principle 12 takes them to the next level as a higher standard. And really what you can see in that green box is the question that I think the FCA are wanting everybody to be asking themselves. You know, the principle is going to hopefully be getting people to think, am I treating my customers as I would want to be treated myself? Now, underneath the consumer principle, we've got 3 cross-cutting rules. Now, these are really, I suppose, the intangible aspects, the intangible side of the consumer duty. And I guess really what I mean by intangible is that this is all about culture and behaviors and attitudes that go on within the industry. Now, there are 3 cross-cutting rules. I'm going to pick on these quite a lot today because for me, this is really where protection is underpinned by the consumer duty. It's within the cross-cutting rules. And as I said, there are 3. So firstly, firms must act in good faith towards retail customers. And really that means acting honestly, fairly, openly and consistently. And it actually, from what we've been told by the FCA, it doesn't necessarily mean that a firm is actually prevented from pursuing legitimate commercial interests of their own or actually seeking profit, but it has to do so in a manner that is actually compliant with this new principle. We've got the second cross-cutting rule, which is firms must avoid causing foreseeable harm to retail customers. So this is about making sure that all aspects of the design of products, the sales, marketing, and actually the support all avoid causing foreseeable harm. But of course, avoiding causing foreseeable harm doesn't actually mean a firm is responsible for preventing all harm. For example, a firm which reasonably believes that a customer understands and accepts the risks of potentially a rather risky product won't breach the rule if it fails to prevent them. And we've got the third cross-cutting rule, which is firms must enable and support retail customers to pursue their financial objectives. And a couple of things to think about here is this is really about making sure retail customers have got the information and the support that they need, making sure that retail customers actually enjoy the use of the product. Maybe they go through switching or exiting or actually can complain without unnecessary barriers or any delays. Now, as I said, these cross-cutting rules for me personally, I think really underpin protection. And I'm going to bring this to life a lot throughout today's session, particularly when we look at protection as a way of trying to avoid causing foreseeable harm. And actually, if we're having conversations with customers when it comes to protection, what are their long-term objectives? It might be to maintain their standard of living if an unexpected event happens. It may be that if there's a death, a serious illness, that they have funds available to maybe repay the mortgage, pass on some funds to loved ones. Again, these are all areas of helping clients enable and support them to achieve their financial objectives. And then underneath the cross-cutting rules, we've got these 4 outcomes, and each of these represent different areas or different elements that really sits with the firm and customer relationship. So it's all about how products and services are designed, the sales works, the services that clients receive, and also the price and the value that customers receive as well. So I'll briefly go through each of them just to give you a bit of a flavour for what the FCA are really referring to. So under the products and services outcome, the question that the FCA are asking here is that are the products and services being designed in a way that would meet customers' needs, and actually are they fit for purpose? The FCA are really wanting all products and services that are sold to consumers to be fit for purpose. Under the price and value outcome, so are the products and services fairly priced so that the customer gets fair value for the money from maybe opting for a particular product or service? Consumer understanding, so are firms' communications about their products and services clear and not misleading? And under consumer support, so does the firm have systems in place that hopefully provide adequate support to customers? And the FCA are really wanting firms to provide, I guess, a level of support that meets the customer's needs throughout the entire relationship, not just at the point where a sale is happening. Something I've been hearing quite a lot since we've been discussing consumer duty, and we've done this probably over the last maybe 9-10 months with some force. And one of the things is this is just consumer duty with TCF with teeth effectively. And a lot of people are saying it is just an extension of TCF. We're already doing this. We don't need to do anything different for consumer duty. Now, I do need to stress that consumer duty is much more stricter than treating customers fairly. Yes, it builds on some of the areas, but it is significantly stricter. And the 4 areas that I've really found where actually the stricter elements of consumer duty come in are actually purpose, responsibility, supervision, and standards. So what do I mean by purpose? Well, thinking back to the purpose of treating customers fairly, that was to ensure firms had the right infrastructure and the culture and frameworks in place to enable fair treatment of customers, wasn't it? The FCA wanted all firms to really consistently show that fair treatment of customers is at the heart of their business model. Consumer duty differs in that it's not all about showing that the FCA that you've got processes and frameworks in place, but actually whether or not they're actually effective in delivering good outcomes for customers. The emphasis here is on outcomes, not just fair outcomes, but actually good outcomes. And that's really something that the FCA have been honing in quite a lot on. Under responsibility, so I think it does come as no surprise that there are still some companies out there engaging in some fairly shady practices. And in fact, it is no secret that some firms do build in budget for fines that they might be landed with should they be unlucky enough to get caught. Now, the FCA know this, and whereas with TCF, it did make the regulator's responsibility to actually go in and figure out whether the company had acted in bad faith, Consumer Duty puts the responsibility on the company's shoulders, the firm's shoulders, to ensure that their customers are actually getting these good outcomes. With supervision, so I think this is an area where actually this TCF with teeth really comes to life. Now, up until now, firms really have got to provide complaints data, I guess, as a bit of an indicator to customer outcomes. The assumption there is that because someone hasn't complained, they're actually having good outcomes. It's clear really that I think this is slightly maybe a discoloured belief, and I think the FCA have made a number of moves to really try and address this, one being this Consumer Duty implementation. So under the Consumer Duty, firms for each of those products that they sell will need to define the customer journey, and actually what does a good outcome look like for each of those customer journeys. So they'll need to show, using various different types of data, that customers can actually achieve these good outcomes over the whole customer lifetime, as we mentioned earlier. With TCF, a review by the regulator mainly focused on maybe senior management, some of the processes, controls, not actually really just the raw data that firms would have provided. And the last one is standards. So I think the main question that is being asked by the regulator at the moment under TCF is your TCF framework appropriate? And under Consumer Duty, the FCA are going to be asking, are customer outcomes good? So I said outcomes-based supervision is much more difficult to explain away. This outcomes-based supervision is this big change that we're seeing the FCA really start to bring to life. And as it says there, doing nothing is not an option. And when we look at a little bit about the protection opportunity later on, we're going to talk a little bit about, if we don't talk protection in our existing businesses, what does the next option look like? Maybe for whatever reason we aren't embedding protection, what else can we do in that situation? Again, there's a fantastic area that we'll explore shortly. So how is all of this actually going to be monitored by the FCA? Well, the FCA have actually said a key part of Consumer Duty is that firms themselves must assess, they must test, they must understand and evidence the outcomes that the clients are actually receiving. With an assessment of actually whether or not good outcomes are being delivered, hopefully done at least annually. They haven't prescribed any specifics on whether they're going to be reviewing these on an annual basis, but their expectations is that firms must be at least doing these tests at least annually. Good thing is, when it comes to trying to look at the types of data and monitoring that the FCA are expecting firms to collect, they have given some kind suggestions as to what firms can look for. And within the final rules that the FCA published last year, towards the end of the fairly chunky document, there are some pretty useful references to what could be collected to help monitor customer outcomes. So it could be an all manner of these different points that we've got on screen just now. It could be persistence rates. If you've got customer retention records, maybe claims, cancellation rates, file reviews, again, can help hopefully the firm and anyone reviewing the firm's files to actually see the sales process that are going on. Social media ratings, again, a really simple way to try and get an understanding as to whether good outcomes are being achieved from customers or not. Customer feedback, whether that's formal or informal, it can help firms identify areas for improvement, areas that are working well. Behavioural insights, complaints, internal procedure reviews. We've got training and competence. So again, evidence of attending sessions like ones we're at today. Surveys sent out to clients post services. And another interesting one actually is using third-party data. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what we can do in terms of helping you access protection data that can help comply with what the FCA are and looking for within the Consumer Duty, again, a little bit later on when we look at some of the Royal London solutions. So I want to bring back this idea that this presents us with a huge world of opportunity. I guess that was a little bit of a consumer duty in a nutshell. I guess a pretty big nutshell, you could say. But this session is all about looking at the opportunity, looking at the positive angle of consumer duty. And what I want you to do and again, just as another moment, is just if you're a business owner or if you're a representative of a firm, what are your big concerns? As a business owner, as an individual and employee, what are your big objectives? What are your big concerns for you and the business? That could be a whole manner of different things. You may want to avoid risk. You may want to avoid taking too much risk or too much bad risk that could effectively put yourself at jeopardy. Reputation, you probably as an individual want to continue to grow your reputation, when you enhance your reputation, when you enhance the firm's reputation. You want to retain clients, you want to keep growing your client book and keep clients on the books. And revenue, as a business, as an individual, you want to continue to bring in revenue, you want to grow the firm's revenue. So risk, reputation, retention, and revenue, four probably big areas that a lot of individuals will be thinking are quite key to them and their business. Now, when we overlay what the consumer duty is trying to do, where does that fit with what these big concerns and objectives might be? So what the consumer duty is hopefully doing is giving individuals and firms peace of mind that actually they are complying with regulation. They are regulatory compliant, hopefully alleviating any risk that they may be straying into territories that they may have the FCA breathing down their neck. Reputation, if we're talking protection, again with a consumer duty perspective, does this open up better outcomes for clients? If they are experiencing unexpected life events, they are protected, they are financially resilient. Does this create better outcomes, help the reputation of the firm? And generally a better product understanding. If we're engaging new types of products, i.e. protection, does this create a better reputation of the industry as a whole? We've all heard about the advice gap, the protection advice gap that's been around for decades. Hopefully making sure that what the consumer duty is trying to help us do and talk with clients, hopefully reduce that advice gap over the years to come. Longevity of relationships, we're going to look at this a little bit later on when we talk some of the protection tools available to you. Protection is a great way to keep clients on the books for longer. If we're discussing protection reviews, it creates an all manner of different touch points to engage with clients over the future and hopefully keeps them, again, on the books for longer. And from a revenue perspective, we may be having new conversations. The consumer duty may be bringing us into this world of talking protection for the first time. This is new conversations, new business opportunities, new referral opportunities, and again, hopefully brings new revenue to the business as well. Now, as I said right at the beginning, we are pretty much halfway through the timeline that the FCA have set out to achieve compliance with the duty. So there was a couple of key steps that happened last year. Firstly, the final rules were published, and all firms had to have their implementation plans effectively submitted to FCA by the I think it was mid to end of October last year. I think it was yesterday we've actually seen a review from the FCA being published on a handful of those plans. They've given some ideas as to what's been seen as good practice, what areas maybe need to be improved. So definitely worth having a little look at the review of some of those implementation plans that the FCA published yesterday. In terms of upcoming dates, so a couple of things to factor are really the two dates on the right-hand side, July 2023 and July 2024. So by July of this year, effectively all remedial action has to have been implemented so that all open products and services comply with the consumer duty. So it's going to effectively come into force for all existing products and services. By July next year, again, all actions need to have been taken to ensure that closed products and services comply with the consumer duty. So a couple of key dates there just to remember, and say the key thing there being we are only a matter of months away from implementation of this taking place. Now, the good thing is it's not going to be taking a retrospective look. The consumer duty will be really taking a forward look. So it's not going to be applied to retrospectively in cases where it might have flagged up. Now, I just want to briefly take a look at some of the insight we've picked up from advisors when we've asked them around what are they doing with their own business in terms of preparing for the consumer duty, and what are the areas that they maybe are concerned about. Now, I do need to flag, we did ask this question towards the middle part of last year, so hopefully some of the figures here will have changed, because when one of the questions we asked was, do you expect to make any changes to your business? Now, majority say they expect to make some form of changes, be that small or maybe significant. 27% say they didn't expect to make any changes. And what was quite alarming last year was about 19% of firms that we asked were actually unaware of the Consumer Duty. And I said, hopefully that has changed over the last few months with it being such a talking point. But again, nonetheless, there are a lot of businesses that do expect to make some changes. But what exactly do the areas consist of that advisors want to make changes? So potentially making changes to the processes that they end up referring referrals to clients. The actual communications between advisor and clients, 31% said they were going to be making changes or reviewing how they communicate to clients. Actually, even suitability of past product recommendations as well. There was a bit of insight into there as to some firms looking to make changes to how they've recommended products in the past. We also asked where exactly do people feel that they're going to go for support? And quite interestingly, majority said either through product providers or their network if they're linked to a network. Now, I think quite an interesting area because over the particularly last 6 to 9 months, something I've seen is a huge amount of communication and support being publicized from networks and product providers. So what I want to take a little look just now at is what can we be doing, hopefully today and onwards, that will help us prepare for the Consumer Duty coming in only a matter of months. So what things can we be doing today and beyond? So firstly, maybe mapping out different stages of your client's journey. Now, a lot of this will probably have been done if we've been doing our Outlook plans for the FCA from last October. So understanding the different stages of your client's journey through their eyes, regardless of your specialism. So if you're a mortgage advisor, if you're a protection or GI specialist, if you're a wealth advisor, how are meetings arranged? What information are clients provided with? Is it done digitally? Do they get hard copies? Think about your existing compliance monitoring. For the Consumer Duty to be really properly embedded, I'm a strong believer that the senior management and certification regimes will need to be already embedded quite significantly. Through all of the products that you distribute, how do clients achieve value for money? How much are clients paying for the products and services that they receive? And does a low price mean fair value? Is something that is unsuitable but cheap still suitable? Does it mean just because it is cheap that it's offering value to clients? And MI, we've looked at earlier a little bit some of the points that the FCA are looking at provided for firms to try and capture some of this MI. We are in a data-led world. The FCA are definitely taking a data-led approach with their supervision of the Consumer Duty. And under the Consumer Duty rules, there's going to be this annualized review expectation from firms to be carrying out off their data and MI. And I think finally, understand all the different ways that you communicate with existing prospective customers. Log in how you communicate with new and existing customers. Hopefully can help see the types of communication and actually the volumes of communications that are being sent out as well. So the latter part of the session today is really about the role protection plays. And from a Royal London perspective, there are so many different angles that protection can be brought to life with the Consumer Duty. But for me, it really sits with the cross-cutting rules that we mentioned earlier on. So firms must act in good faith towards retail customers. Firms must avoid causing foreseeable harm to retail customers. And firms must enable and support retail customers to pursue their financial objectives. Now, for me, where exactly protection underpins that is through a few different areas. Through signposting. So if we are not talking protection ourselves, are we looking at signposting those clients to a protection specialist so that they will have the conversation about how can they stay financially resilient if they experience a serious illness, a life-changing illness? Maybe they have to go off work long term. Maybe they pass away prematurely. Again, what impact will that have on the family, their lifestyle, their ability to continue to do the things that they love? And if we're not having a conversation about ways to mitigate those financial risks, can we still make sure the conversation happens somewhere by a protection specialist? Trusts and nominating beneficiaries. Again, we're going to look at this in a few slides' time. But a great way to help make sure that customers are able to hopefully achieve their financial objectives, making sure money goes to where it needs to go to when it should go to that particular source. Support services, provider tools and support. Most providers these days have got a fantastic set of tools and customer support services. Multi-benefit solutions, so being able to provide customers with protection in a portfolio of different types of covers. We're going to look at all these areas as we go as well. And best advice platforms. In 2023, the world that we live in today is it's an almighty place for protection knowledge, and there are so many different bells and whistles applied to different providers. But actually, making the most of these best advice platforms can really help you understand what particular providers can offer and how that can help customers achieve their objectives. So the first thing I want to look at with regards to protection is about signposting. And signposting, I think, means different things to different people. It could be that we are maybe signposting clients to a protection specialist. Maybe we're signposting clients to services that we don't offer ourselves. Maybe it's will writing, maybe it is solicitor services. Maybe we are actually signposting the fact to clients that we're going to be having a conversation about protection at some point during our conversation. I think it means a lot of things, different things to different people. But actually, the crux of signposting is about really good outcomes for customers. It's about making sure that they are aware of the risks that they face and putting them into a position that they can actually do something about it, i.e. take the protection conversation further. So a few things to think about, whether signposting to you is about pointing clients to additional services, whether it's about making sure that they're aware protection is going to be discussed during our meeting. I think the key thing is it's about making the clients, putting them in that position that they can have the conversation. But there are many different reasons why we may not talk protection ourselves. Maybe it's not our area of specialisms. Maybe it is not part of our existing business. If we're not having the protection conversation ourselves, can we look at arranging professional introducer arrangements where we can get the clients in front of another protection specialist? And the other area where protection signposting is really quite powerful is actually where maybe we have tried to find cover, but we've gone through all the different routes, and maybe for whatever reason, the client has a health condition that it makes it very difficult to provide cover. The British Insurer Broker Association, or BIBA for short, has a fantastic find a broker service that can put clients in touch with firms that specialise in individuals that have health conditions that might make them more difficult to find cover elsewhere. So again, as a really good last resort, have a little look at the BIBA website. And again, we'll share these slides after the session today. So where else does protection underpin the consumer duty? Well, another area is with multi-benefit protection solutions. Now, these are quite a commonplace in the industry these days. Multi-benefit protection solutions are effectively a way of mixing and matching different types of cover all in one portfolio, all in one plan effectively. At Royal London, we refer to ours as a personal menu plan. And within the personal menu plan, you can actually mix and match up to 10 different covers in one plan. So we could be mixing and matching maybe different types of income-based solutions, maybe lump sum-based solutions. There might be different start dates, different people covered, different sum assureds. We may have indexed cover, we may have level-based cover. And it's all done, as I said, in one plan. The benefits of doing it this way is actually you can have up to 10 different types of cover, protecting clients for different types of risks. With the Royal London menu plan, there is only one plan fee. It's all done through one application, and actually, from a client's perspective, they see one direct debit coming out every month. The other angle that I've been speaking to advisors quite a lot about over the last few weeks is actually where maybe it's not necessarily in the best interest for a customer to have all of their protection solutions in one portfolio. So there may be the need to have protection with various different providers. And again, that's where this idea of creating a protection portfolio can also come to light. As I said, some of the benefits of this mix and match approach means we can have different types of cover, suits different types of needs, different types of objectives in one plan. Now, you might recognize these 4 boxes because for me, there are 4 benefits to businesses for actually talking multi-benefit protection policies. So how do multi-benefit protection policies help you in your business? Well, from a risk perspective, we are providing customers with the opportunity to make claims against different types of risks. We're protecting them against the risks of being off work sick for an extended amount of time, maybe passing away prematurely, developing a serious illness. We're giving them multiple opportunities to make a claim. From a revenue perspective, again, we're able to offer various different types of products to customers through this slightly mix and match approach, so more revenue and review opportunities. Retention, this menu approach, this multi-benefit approach often is a quite hard to copy solution. So hopefully it makes your advice harder to copy. And from a reputation perspective, you're providing quality cover for customers as well. Now, I just wanted to plug a new tool that we have on our website that can help you talk multi-benefit plans or menu plans with customers. Now, it's called the Value of Menu tool. It's down at the bottom of our advisor website's tools section. So what I'm going to do, take a little quick look through the tool and how exactly it works, because again, going back to the consumer duty, this is a meteoric change. We don't always like change. Sometimes we need a little bit of support when change is happening. And hopefully, one of the things that we're looking at today is that there are so many different sources of support that can help you bring protection, which for many may be a new conversation to be had, into your business. So the Value of Menu tool it's a great tool to help bring multi-benefit protection solutions to life with clients. It's a really simple tool, and you just need to give us some very high-level details of your client's situation. So how many people are applying for cover? Do they have, or are they planning to have any children? And do they have an existing mortgage? If you select yes to an existing mortgage, you'll see another screen that just asks, what is the current mortgage term and an outstanding balance. You're then presented with a couple of options here. Now, you could look at, on the left-hand side, a slightly more traditional form of protection, kind of maybe how we've seen the protection industry built over the last number of years, about maybe giving clients a bit of life cover, maybe a bit of life or critical illness cover, provides them with a sum of money if there's a death, if there's a serious illness. But actually, that traditional approach can often result in slightly higher premiums. We're looking at a joint life or earlier critical illness policy on the traditional example here. Sum assured £150,000, so we're assuming it's equal to the client's mortgage balance. That can be quite a costly option. The right-hand side, we are comparing it with a menu plan. So we are providing clients with different types of cover. So we've actually got 6 different types of cover in one plan here. That means there's a much greater likelihood of a claim happening. And actually, by doing it through this approach, we've managed to bring the premium down quite substantially as well. Now, we can go into this a little bit further. Again, for time, I'm not going to go into it in too much detail today, but if we did hit see cover details on either the traditional or the menu option, we're able to get a bit more insight into exactly what we can do within each of these options in terms of flexibility. Because one of the other areas of menu plans is that they do offer customers a lot of flexibility. If things change over time, the menu plan and the parts that are within it can change with them. So on here, we've got Essential Plus, and we've got Comprehensive. Now, we don't actually refer to our products at Royal London in these terms, Essential Plus, or Comprehensive. Really, this is just a way to show the levels of flexibility that clients have with these menu plans, and the fact that any of these areas can be tweaked and changed. And again, the premium reflects that as well. So what I would say, definitely encourage you, if you are interested in hearing a little bit more about how this tool can help you talk menu plans and multi-benefit protection plans with customers, do get in touch with your Royal London Business Development Manager. So right money, right hands, right time. Another area where, for me, I think consumer duty is underpinned by protection. And what I'm talking about here are trusts. So actually, by putting protection on our agenda, we're hopefully making sure that should unexpected life events happen, clients and their families are able to get financial support, helps them maintain the standard of living that they're used to, and maybe repay their significant debts, i.e. their mortgage. But the consumer duty is shining an even bigger light now on these customer outcomes. So making sure that a conversation about protecting clients' finances happen at some stage, either by yourself or, as we said, by signposting that to protection specialists, is great, and hopefully will help clients achieve those good outcomes. But what I want to think about is, what might those objectives actually be? So, it might be the reason we're having a protection conversation is that to ensure maybe when a claim needs to be made on a life policy, that the client's family are able to use that money to pay some or all of the mortgage. It might actually be to ensure that maybe if a client's diagnosed with a serious illness, that a sum of money is going to be paid out to help make adjustments to the home. maybe a client's objectives are that they're concerned if they pass away or became seriously ill, that there's an inheritance tax concern. Maybe they want to make sure that they're setting up a protection policy that can help repay an IHT liability on death. And it might even be just that clients want to make sure that their loved ones have got a sum of money to do whatever they want to do when they pass away. I think regardless of why protection is being discussed, the intention is about providing good customer outcomes when a bad situation arises. But for me, does having a protection policy alone go far enough? And is there anything else we can do that help clients achieve those objectives and make sure that they are met? So I want to assume just for a second, we've written a life policy. We've got a client, it's a life policy, we've got a single life policy here. Now on their death, they want for the proceeds to be paid out to their children. Now upon a claim happening and upon that claim needing to be made, what would good customer outcomes actually look like? Well, probably making sure that there's no delay in the payment. Does the client have any children that need access to the money immediately? Or would they be able to wait maybe weeks or months before they can get the funds from a life policy? We might want to be making sure that we're avoiding IHT on the policy proceeds as well. What does the client's estate look like? There might not be any immediate IHT concerns just now, but what if when a claim is made on a life insurance policy that sum of money is moved into the client's estate? Could we have created an IHT concern or even added to an existing one? Again, future financial goals there. Are the client's objectives also stating who they want to receive the money when a claim happens? Do they have any people, second or third level beneficiaries that they want to receive the money? Are there people that don't want to receive the proceeds from a life policy? In fact, how do they ensure any of these options happen? How do they ensure any of these outcomes happen? And really, this is where trusts come into the equation. And particularly from a protection perspective, this is why trusts are the gold standard way to finish off a protection conversation. So there's three phrases here: right time, right money, right hands. I love. It's a little mantra that I often use when talking about trusts. And what exactly I mean by right time, right money, right hands is by right time. What is a reasonable length of time for someone to wait before a claim is paid out on a life policy? When would the proceeds need to be paid? Do beneficiaries need the money immediately, maybe to pay an IHT liability? Now, there is something, a bit of a necessary evil out there that can cause a delay on receiving these types of proceeds, and it's called probate, or if you're up in Scotland, it's called confirmation. And it is a bit of a necessary evil, and we've got to endure that process before policy proceeds are paid out when a policy is not in trust. So actually, by placing a policy in trust, we can bypass the need for probate or confirmation. Right money in the middle there. So what's the sum assured? How much is sufficient? What's enough? And actually, would the full amount of the proceeds be paid out when a claim happens? Because the claim proceeds won't be subject to inheritance tax charge on the estate of the deceased if it's in trust. But the money paid out from a protection policy that's not in trust when a claim happens will fall into a client's estate, potentially therefore liable to IHT at the current rate of 40%. So trust can be a very effective way of tax planning. And we've got right hands as well there. So again, kind of what I was referring to earlier, it's about control. Do clients have particular beneficiaries in mind that they want to receive the proceeds, or people that they don't want to receive the proceeds from a life policy? Trusts can allow greater control for customers. And again, when we overlay the consumer duty over all of this about helping customers achieve their future financial objectives, trusts really do just that. So in the latter part of our session today, in the last 10 or so minutes, I want to just take a little look at some of the tools, some of the additional tools that we have at Royal London that can help you have conversations about protection, but also help you evidence the conversations happened and hopefully make sure that we're doing what we can to help evidence the consumer duty is being complied with. So you may have heard me talk about the Marketing Studio at some point in the past. This is a free resource that you've got access to from Royal London. And it's a great way to try and overcome the barrier that clients might present you with, which is, it will never happen to me. I don't want to talk about it. I'm young, I'm fit, I'm healthy. This is a great tool and a great resource to help you turn the conversation away to actually probability, chance, and risk. And what we're looking at here is a risk report. It's a great way just to show clients what their chance is, what their probability is of passing away prematurely before retirement, developing a serious illness before retirement, or being off work sick long term before retirement. And this is bespoke to the client. This is created using their own data, so their name, their age, their smoker status, their gender, their date of birth, retirement date, and you're able to produce this bespoke sales aid that you can see on the left-hand side. And it's a great way just to get them to see that they do face risks. We're not superhuman, and it is also bespoke to your business as well. So your logo, your contact details appear on here. There's nothing referencing Royal London on there at all. It is bespoke to you, your clients, and your business, and it's free of charge to use. The other area, as I said, going back to the consumer duty, is that the FCA within the final rules have actually said that consumers can only be expected to take responsibility where firms' communications can enable them to understand the products and services, the features, the risks, and the implications that they make. So actually, by showing clients resources like this, where they see the risks that they face, lets them see the risks they face and the reasons why protection should be something we discuss. Again, hopefully will be a good way to help us show compliance with the consumer duty expectations. And also, you can download this as a PDF, and you hopefully keep it on file, evidence that the conversation took place. Cost is another common barrier, isn't it, when it comes to protection? Maybe I'm not sure if I can afford it. You know, the age-old question is, you know, if you stop cutting out your coffees every week, a takeaway coffee every week, could you save a couple of pounds to actually maybe put towards a protection policy? Well, I think that coffee analogy is maybe slightly more dated these days, but actually there are some fantastic calculators available from lots of different providers. We've got one on screen just now. It's called our lifestyle calculator, and it's a really good way just to try and show how those trivial spends that clients might be making do add up. So I've got an example here, and everything on here is completely interchangeable. So you can change the cost per unit, you can change the amount of times per week, and you can even add other items that clients might use more specifically. So we've got a little example there. This example shows a client spends £272 a week on fairly trivial outgoings. Now we can go through this, we could update some of the figures and we could maybe reduce some of the costs. And we can see there, by doing that, we've actually made a £64 a month saving. A £64 a month saving that could very well counter-argue that I can't afford it challenge. If we can make those savings, provide protection to customers. Another really powerful tool to use actually during the application stage at Royal London is called the Send to Client feature. Now, ultimately, with consumer duty looking at processes and systems and technology, it's about making sure that it's as simple as possible for clients to achieve these good outcomes. And we want to make the application process as easy as possible as well. And then we've got a fantastic resource called the Send to Client feature. So basically what you can do here is during the application stages, you can send the clients an application for them to complete their medical details. They do it in their own privacy, they do it at their own time. So hopefully it means that they're a little bit more honest, a little bit more open with any disclosures that they need to make, and avoids the risk that there may be not being open about particular areas, maybe reducing the risk that we can't pay a claim because of misrepresentation, maybe incorrect or incomplete information that hasn't been provided. So again, a great resource here to try and hopefully get clients to complete more openly and honestly the medical applications. When it comes to trust, we looked at some of the benefits of trust earlier on, but how do we find the right trust? Well, we've got a great tool again on our website. It's called the Find the Right Trust tool picker, creatively named. And it's a great way to guarantee that you will always find the right trust when talking with clients. It's a simple step-by-step flowchart. You're asked some questions about the type of cover you're applying for, and at the end, you're presented with the trust form that you should be using for that particular situation. Again, it's about guaranteeing that you always use the right trust every time. The final area where we've got some tools that can help you with with hopefully consumer duty is called a pre-sale underwriting tool. And again, in an attempt to try and make sure the processes are as easy as possible and help you manage clients' expectations, our pre-sale underwriting tool is about giving you, I guess, an indicative decision as to a particular case before you actually come to submit the application. You might ask some basic information about the clients, the type of cover they're looking to apply for, and then what you can see is the expected underwriting decision that the client would get. So even before the application has been submitted. So if a client's got maybe a particular health condition, maybe an extreme or dangerous hobby or job, maybe you're unsure how we would underwrite it, or maybe even if they're unsure how we would underwrite them against their BMI, maybe a family history, it's a really good way to get an understanding and to avoid putting the application through to then find out there's maybe additional bits of information required or even increases to premium. So I want to round up our session today by just taking a look at support services. Now, most providers in the industry these days offer support services, and it's probably one of the fantastic but also hidden areas of protection these days that can offer so much value to customers. Now, these types of services can range from second medical opinions, mental well-being support, virtual GPs, dedicated nurses, specialist therapies and treatments, even actually legal and recruitment support as well. Some providers can even allow access to these without needing to make a claim, and the service can extend to the person that's covered, their partner and their children as well. So one of the things we'd encourage you to do is, if you do have clients with protection policies, have a look at what that provider offers in terms of support services, and is there an opportunity to engage the client with those services? Remember, they don't need to make a claim often to use these services, so they are available from the moment the policy goes on risk. And it's a great way to try and demonstrate the value, which again, the FCA are really enforcing with Consumer Duty to life with clients. Just a very brief look at Royal London's support service. We call ours Helping Hand. It is available from the moment the policy goes on risk on all advised protection policies, and it's available for the person that's covered, their partner and their children, and there's no cost to using the services either. And there's three little areas that Helping Hand comes to life. So we've got Helping Hand for Recovery, which provides clients with dedicated nurses, second medical opinions, just going to pick a few out here at random, bereavement counselling, which was one of the most common reasons for using Helping Hand from Royal London. And even the likes of debt support as well. We're currently living in this cost of living crisis. There are services that clients might not necessarily think they can get access to that actually they could provide really valuable support. Helping Hand for Wellbeing, this is a relatively new aspect of our proposition. So we provide clients with mental wellbeing applications, and also a really powerful one that we've had some great insight into recently from case studies from advisors that have used it and the clients have used it, which is a virtual 24/7 GP. So we know that trying to get access to GPs at the moment is still not as easy as it has been in the past. The virtual 24/7 GP service can get clients access, if they are struggling to get access to their normal GP. For business clients, if you've got business owner clients, they also have access to recruitment specialists, legal support. Again, if the business is needing some support with growth, maybe illness, redundancy issues, they have access to these support services through their Helping Hand protection, their business protection policy. So just a bit of a round robin of everything we've looked at today. We've covered a lot of different areas about what exactly Consumer Duty is, and hopefully what we've seen and what I'd love to think everyone's taken away from the session is that there are so many opportunities to look at this as a positive area. And actually, from a protection perspective, if we aren't already talking protection with customers, the Consumer Duty really is going to be enforcing the value that protection should be bringing to customers. So a couple of other areas to help document the protection conversation. We've had a look at the Marketing Studio risk report earlier. We've got reasons why documents on our advisor website. So if you are needing to try and, evidence or justify using Royal London, we've got some fantastic reasons why paragraphs. Trust toolkits, this can give you some really good approach letters if you want to re-engage clients with the importance of trust and protection. We've looked at Helping Hand, we've got some great sales aids, again, can be a good way to try and maybe reaffirm the services available to customers. I'm going to jump a little bit here because I want to go into the business health check report. So one of the fantastic things that we can help you with at Royal London is that if you speak with your Royal London BDM, you may be able to access to a DQM report or a business health check report. And there's a great way just to understand the types of business and areas of protection that actually you might want to be looking to explore. And it's a great way to try and pick up with your BDM following the session today. And signposting, again, we've mentioned earlier the importance of signposting and making sure clients have that protection conversation with somebody, if not yourself. And again, making sure that we're having that documented somehow during the conversation will hopefully go a long way to achieving what the Consumer Duty is trying to achieve. So, Christian, before I pass back over to you, I'm hopefully comfortable that we've ticked off each of those learning outcomes. You can let me know if we haven't. A lot of stuff we've covered there over the last 45 or so minutes. I think one of the key things to take away is have a look on our advisor website. I'll leave it on screen just now. And also get in touch with your BDM if you want any support following today's session. Do speak to your Royal London BDM. And they're always going to be more than happy to help you talk about any of the areas we've looked at today, but also to help you explore new areas for protection. I guess all that's really left me to do is say a huge thank you to everyone for listening to my session today. And Christian, I will pass back over to you to see if we've had any questions come through.
Thank you, Gregor. I've seen nothing come through in the chat in terms of questions generally. I had a question for you, but you've almost just answered it then. My question to you was going to be, if you had one tip for anybody right now as to where to start with this, where would you go? But I think you've just put it up on the screen.
Yeah,
which is get on the portal and talk to your BDM. But from everything you've said there, your knowledge of Consumer Duty and what it means is clearly extensive, and thank you for that, because it was a good refresher for everybody in terms of how we arrived at where we are today. But what would if there was one thing that you were going to do as an advisor right now, or that you're seeing advisors doing that you like, what would that be? Where would you start?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think a couple of things. So there's going to be a broad range of specialisms on the call today. I think if we are in the mortgage space, we're in a bit of a climate at the moment where it's a slightly subdued market. That in itself looks a great opportunity to try and re-engage customers with the importance of putting protection in place in the first instance. The other area that I'm seeing quite a lot of advisors pick up on at the moment is the cost of living crisis. We can't ignore that we are in this cost of living crisis. That in itself presents a huge opportunity to either re-engage existing clients that may be concerned with their costs that they're paying for their existing policies, or maybe didn't take out policies to begin with, and maybe are concerned about being able to afford their rent and obviously protection on the top of it. So I think the cost of living crisis really presents a big protection opportunity in its own. The third area I would just briefly mention is, if people are brand new to protection, start with yourself. Look at your own situation. Is there an opportunity to get yourself protected, get yourself covered, understand what it means for you, and build your confidence up that way? Start with yourself and work out from there. I think that's probably a really good area if you are wanting to try and get into protection first and foremost.
Super, thank you. Any questions from anybody before we have a quick break, before I come and talk to you about my session in terms of what we believe makes a good piece of protection advice? Wow,
stunned.
We'll take that as a positive in terms of you've answered all the questions we've got along. But no, seriously, Gregor, thank you very much. That was a very, very informative session. Covered a lot of ground. Obviously, as we've said previously, if anybody's got any questions post-event, anything they want to ask that's personal, come through to us. We'll be sharing Gregor's details as well. But equally, obviously, get in touch with your BDM or onto the Royal London website regardless. Okay, brilliant. Well, look, we're at 10:28, so just 2 minutes early, which is fab. Should we take a 10-minute break, come back, and then I'll come onto my session, and we can carry on this conversation? Brilliant. Gregor, thank you very much. I will see everybody in 10 minutes.
Thanks, everyone.
Fantastic. Thank you all. Hello. Just checking people are back and can hear me. I've just been having a quick look through the attendee list, and nice to see so many familiar names, and I can't say faces because no one's got their cameras on, but nice to see so many familiar names. For those that don't know me, my name's Christian. I head up the advisor support team here within the Verve Group. My role is predominantly working with advisors and firms on, I guess, helping them be as compliant as possible, but more so to run a business or run an advice process that works for the business. So I want to try and bring a couple of angles on this session. This session is about how we structure advice in terms of protection, how we build around the key elements that are the advice process, but a lot of this is down to you guys and your businesses. Now, I know we've got best part of 100 people on here, so it's not going to be the easiest to have full engagement. But I'm very, very happy if people want to ask me questions as we go through this. Anyone who's heard me speak before will realise will know they don't want to just listen to me for the next hour. So I'll probably want people to be chipping in. That's the same for me. I don't want to listen to my own voice for the next hour. I'd very much like to have conversation in this, or have chat if people want to put things into the chat. Very appreciate that not everyone can put their cameras or their mics on, but let's try and make this as engaging as possible. In terms of what I'm going to cover today, the idea here is that we're going to build on the conversation that we've just started. So with the various different elements of the advice process, that being with an element of consumer duty. Gregor gave us a really good summary as to where things are at in terms of consumer duty. I've got a few things to add, but I'm going to try and not make this consumer duty heavy, albeit I will be linking a lot of what I'm saying back to how I believe firms should be considering and taking consumer duty into light as part of all of this. We'll be looking at the disclosure necessities. I'll talk a little bit more about how that looks, but we've been privy to a recent FCA investigation, or I guess review of a firm, and something they've picked up, which was quite surprising to us, was some of the disclosure points that I don't think people maybe necessarily give as much time and attention as they should do. We'll look at how to structure a suitability report. I don't know about anybody else, but I'm tired of reading 40, 50-page suitability reports. I think we need to try and do what we can to slim this down. Consumer duty hopefully is the opportunity to do that. And I'll talk a little bit more about how I think we can utilise the consumer understanding element of consumer duty to do that. And then what does good look like when it comes to protection advice? So actually, how do we see protection advice being provided well? I work with probably 60 plus firms, paraplanning department. I was nearly said a sister company, Parasols, but it's not a sister company anymore. We are now officially all one. Obviously, a very, very heavily engaged when it comes to working with firms on suitability reports and providing protection advice. So I'm hoping that we've got a really good angle as to what we think good looks like. And then last but not least, looking at what doesn't need to go into a suitability report. Again, how do we reduce this down? How do we try and help you guys be more efficient in what you're doing? Because we know that time is money, and for a lot of people, protection can become a little add-on because they feel they don't have the time, or that the compliance is too heavy on something that in reality doesn't need to be as heavy. If there's anything anybody else would like to cover, please, please, please put your hand up, stick a message in the chat, put your camera on, have a conversation, please. You know, this is your session. In terms of learning outcomes or learning objectives for your CPD records, the idea being is to understand the regulatory and best practice requirements behind providing protection, recognise the impact of consumer duty on protection advice, understanding the regulatory disclosure necessities, being able to create an advice process that meets both your needs and the client needs, and then how to structure a suitability report in line with consumer duty and the end recipient. So just to start, in terms of this whole consumer duty piece, something that I found really interesting, I've done a fair bit of work on this now, both internally with our firms and externally with providers. And it's been quite interesting to me how consumer duty has been a huge focus when it comes to people who are working within the investment, pensions, wealth side of things. Now, I appreciate we've got a very, very broad range of delegates here today. Some people work in pure protection, some people work in protection, mortgage and protection, some people are wealth investment advisors, and obviously you need the CPD when it comes to protection. But there seems to at the moment be far more focus on consumer duty for firms that have an investment and protection part, advice part of their business, a wealth side, rather than mortgage and protection. Which actually for me is quite interesting, because I was listening to a couple of podcasts last week from the regulator. I'm not suggesting you guys need to do that, but obviously it's my job. The key thing that came out of that for me is actually the regulator sees insurance and insurance products as being one of the key elements that actually they feel that consumers aren't receiving good quality advice, fair value, and actually understanding what they're buying. So when you actually look at this and think, well, you know, there's a lot of focus going on to the costs and charges and services provided by wealth advisors. Completely agree, it needs to happen. It is a requirement. But I don't think quite as much focus has been placed on this when it comes to mortgage and protection advisors. Something the regulator came out with this week, and Gregor touched on it, which was an update yesterday. And something that someone tagged me in a tweet last night was that actually firms are, or the regulator believes that firms are overconfident that their existing policies and procedures will be adequate. Having now looked at probably best part of 100 consumer duty risk assessments and implementation plans, I would probably agree. I think firms are not too confident, or so overconfident, that actually what they've always done is going to be sufficient. And for me, I don't think it is. That's not to say that firms need to do a full 180 on their business models, but actually there are lots of elements here that firms might think they're doing but maybe aren't, or firms might think they need to focus on but actually aren't able to articulate that. So if anybody on the back of today has any questions when it comes to consumer duty, or how this is working for you within your business, whether you're an advisor and you're reporting back to senior management, or if you're a senior manager, compliance, whatever it may be, then please don't be afraid to ask any questions of me afterwards, or to drop me a line. So I'm very, very happy to have a look at this with you. Okay, let's look at the advice process. And again, this is coming from a position of experience. I was sat your side of the desk for 15 years of my career as an advisor, and then decided to come onto the dark side, which was into T&C and compliance, and now thankfully work on this side of the desk, which is helping you guys be better at what you're doing without necessarily needing to do a lot of the doing anymore. That said, we work with 100 plus advisors on our T&C program, and 60 plus firms when it comes to understanding their advice process with regards to file checks, etc., etc. So we're seeing what's happening, and for me, I think there are some fundamentals that firms and advisors can get better at in terms of when it comes to providing protection advice, just by looking at the processes that they follow. Nothing out of the ordinary, nothing revolutionary here, but actually just looking at your advice process when it comes to protection advice. So, the obligations. The FCA have stated that to enable a firm to make the recommendations or take the decision which is suitable for the client and the life policy, so that's just based this, they call protection life policies, to propose a contract that is consistent with the client's insurance demands and needs. Now, I'm very happy if anyone wants to write in the chat if they understand what that means, because when I first looked at it, it took me 10 minutes to even start to get my head around it. Now, we know that's not always the way that the FCA handbook's written isn't always the easiest, but actually, if we start to break this down into, I ask myself the question as well, what does that mean in the real world? What are they trying to get at here? The point being is that the advice process needs to really understand exactly what the consumer's needs are. Now, when we start looking at wealth advice, protection planning, financial planning, whatever you want to call it, something that firms have got very, very good at is actually understanding exactly what clients' objectives are. What are they saving for? What is it they're trying to achieve in life? Are they trying to save for retirement? Are they trying to give away assets? Are they trying to provide for future generations? What is it they're trying to achieve? But actually, on the protection side of things, this is an area that isn't really given enough attention, I believe, or we believe, in terms of what we see. At the moment, it seems to be that actually firms just provide a very generic statement of demands and needs without some of it matching the individual circumstances or the product on offer. So an outcome based on regulation is going to be focused on the outcome. So the point about this is, with consumer duty specifically, there is one of the cross-cutting rules that you'd have seen on Gregor's presentation earlier was around avoiding causing foreseeable harm. Now, I don't think there's anyone on this session that is trying to cause foreseeable harm for a client. You're not providing any recommendations that is designed to hurt anybody. That said, by not doing as much research as is necessary in terms of what the client's objectives are, what the client's needs are, and then providing a solution that matches those, would be deemed to be causing foreseeable harm, because your job as an advisor is to look for shortfalls. Does the client have a shortfall in their protection arrangements? Does the client have enough life cover when it comes to covering their mortgage? Do they have income protection to cover their outgoings? When you're talking to business owners, is there a situation with regard to shareholder protection? Are there obvious shortfalls in a client's circumstances that you should have, as part of your fact finding, picked up? And I think in the past, firms have kind of gone, well, it's not our job to tell a client what they need to have if they don't want what we've talked about. But actually, if someone's offering a product without a solution, then a client probably doesn't understand it. And our advice here is that it's your job as an advisor to pinpoint those shortfalls to ensure that a client understands exactly where they have a need. Now, the ways in which we see this being done well are actually, and I don't know how many people have carried out one of these, but a shortfall needs analysis. Now, I remember a shortfall needs analysis from my days at HSBC back in early 2000s, and actually we had to carry out one of these on every single case that we did where there was a protection need, actually documenting and demonstrating to a client how much of a shortfall they had in their protection arrangements. If we didn't have it, we couldn't provide protection advice. We couldn't pluck a figure out of the air of £100,000 for the life cover or £50 a month in terms of premium. It had to be based on what the client shortfall was. Now, that's not to say that that was what the client bought in the end, but actually we're identifying what their needs were for them to then make a decision on whether they felt they could afford it. For those people who are also providing investment pensions advice, I imagine cash flow modelling is something that you're doing day in, day out for clients. But just a quick poll, or not a poll, but a question in the chat box. How many people who aren't involved in investment, pensions or general financial planning use cash flow modelling tools when it comes to protection advice? I've got a few no's coming through. Not for protection advice in isolation. Okay, so the answers are predominantly no. There's not, which doesn't surprise me because we've seen, we see this when it comes to, in the vast majority of cases, when it comes to file checking. Now, please don't think that I'm saying this is a necessity, but this is a tool that is available to you. Great, got someone saying yes. We've got. I've seen this, and this isn't a plug for any one particular provider, because I'm sure they all do it. But something I remember seeing when I was sitting on your side of the desk and had a training session from Voyant was actually how Voyant could be used to provide shortfall needs analysis and demonstrate to a client exactly where their shortfalls were. Now, I'm quite sure that the other cash flow modelling tools can do something similar, but this is a tool that is available to you. And our suggestion would be that actually, if there's a tool available to you to help you do your job better, I think we all appreciate that most clients learn more and see more when it comes to visual demonstration rather than just a number. So actually really good in terms of, in terms of a visual representation of where they might have a shortfall and how that changes based on time. That for me is an absolutely great way of using a piece of software that actually does these things, not for you, but it certainly helps you when it comes to identifying how much of a shortfall a client has. If we ask clients how much of a shortfall they have, we very often find out that actually they didn't have a clue, or the figure they come out with is very, very different to what you come out with. So again, are you using all of the tools that you have available to you when it comes to actually identifying the level of shortfalls a client may have? If you aren't, my suggestion would be talking to any of the financial planning wealth advisors within your business, or speaking to some of the cash flow modeling tools that are out there. And again, please feel free to give us a shout if you want to know, who's out there and what things do, because this is something that I think can help advisors an awful lot. And obviously, when it comes to protecting yourselves against future litigation, and we've now got a cross-cutting rule of preventing foreseeable harm or avoiding causing foreseeable harm. Anything you can do that demonstrates you identified the need, presented it to the client, and they chose not to go ahead is going to protect you long term. I would also hope that actually, if you're presenting it in such a way that the client sees it as a positive, then you might actually be increasing your business. Which at the end of the day, I think we all, one of the reasons why we're all here. The other part is how much time people spend on budget and affordability. Gregor again touched on it. It's a huge issue right now in terms of cost of living. We've got a lot of clients who are trying to cut their costs, trying to look at anything they can do. But actually, one of the things that we see an awful lot is that people aren't actually setting budgets. When it comes to protection advice or mortgage advice, which again is very, very different to when it comes to the financial planning side of things. Financial planning seems to be a lot more about understanding budgets. One of the comments came in just a second ago on the chat is we use budgeting and affordability, and we use cash flow for that. It's a great way to actually sit down and talk to a client about how much they're spending and really start to identify their affordability. Something that I was talking to an advisor about the other day is that they would always pick a figure in terms of, you know, a figure that the client felt they could afford a month. And invariably, the figure would be something like a nice round figure of £50 a month or £100 a month. And actually, the advisor switched that and said, well, why don't we look at it as a percentage? And say, well, it says to the client, what percentage of your monthly income that you bring in are you happy to set aside to protecting that income or the mortgage or the house or whatever it may be? And they come up with a figure of 3%, 5%, which invariably is a lot more than £50 or £100 a month. What they've seen is that actually their penetration rate and the amount they're able to, the amount of cover that's going in place is way, way, way above what it used to be. So again, budgeting and affordability is key here. Understanding what your client's outgoings are is again a requirement. It's as simple as that. From an affordability perspective, it's a requirement to assess affordability when giving protection advice. But from a positive in terms of being able to use this, you know, to talk to clients, this is information is key. So actually having all of that information to hand is going to make a big difference. So again, something we see that can be done better invariably in the advice process is actually really setting some budgets and assessing affordability. So if you're not doing that, or you feel it could be done better, then again, that's something we would suggest that people start to give some focus to. When it comes to understanding the shortfalls, what information is needed to get close to understand the client's true shortfall protection analysis? So again, how are you understanding this? What are you doing? You're going to need detailed income and expenditure. You're going to need details about their assets and liabilities. You're going to need details about their financial planning and future needs. Again, this is something we see a lot when it comes to the wealth side of things, is actually financial planning and future needs. Yeah, it's there. When it comes to mortgage and protection, because they invariably quite often are transactional rather than ongoing relationship, it isn't given quite as much time and attention as it probably can be. So again, talking to your clients about their plans. What are they trying to achieve so that you can build for that as part of this? This is exactly the same whether you're talking about personal or corporate protection needs. So it doesn't matter what side of the fence you're sitting on when it comes to that. Understanding what the future plans of a business are will enable you to plan for it now. Same thing for an individual. When you're starting to think about providing a solution, then we need to understand what the client's trying to achieve. So again, please make sure this is being done as well as it can be, rather than a transactional nature of a relationship. Does your current advice process actually work for protection advice? Now, lots of people work not just as protection advisors. They might be mortgage and protection, they might be wealth and protection. Are you following exactly the same advice process for all of those pieces? If you are, is that the issue? Does it need to be tweaked? Do you need to be looking at the advice process for protection in isolation and think we need to make some tweaks to this because something's not working? For lots of firms, when it comes to and you know, I'm not going to hide from this, when it comes to a sales perspective, they know full well that actually, you know, they talk to a client and 3 out of 4 clients will end up buying from them and being a client long term. When it comes to protection, it's 1 in 4. Why is that? What's the difference? Is it the process that's being followed? Because invariably the advisor doesn't become and I'm not saying it's a bad advisor, but an advisor doesn't become less successful with one particular product. Usually it's normally the process that's been followed. So actually, do you need to have a look at your advice process, and especially in line with Consumer Duty? This is a big part of that. Does it work for protection advice, or does it need to be looked at? Then we start to get into the fundamentals. So actually, with the advice process, what documentation are you doing? Is your client in receipt of your initial disclosure document, terms of business and client agreement prior to the commencement of any work? From a compliance perspective, this is a must. But again, it's something we see that's not happening as often as it should be. A client should know exactly who you are, what you do, what your services are, roughly what your charges may be prior to engaging. From a GDPR perspective, obviously they need to know what you're going to do with their data. But we still, time and time again, when it comes to protection advice, see the terms of business being signed on the same day as the application forms. Yet you've been talking to the client and taking their data for months and months prior to that. The other point is, and again, this is the question, is do you have a minimum income requirement when it comes to protection? If you're saying that actually a case has to provide a certain level of income to you as the firm or you as the advisor, if the commission that's being provided by the provider isn't sufficient, are you going to top that up with fees? If you are, is that disclosed? Does a client know that actually they might have to pay something? The FCA are the FCA are placing a lot more focus on this. FOS have always done that. So if it comes to complaints, FOS will very, very often look at the disclosures in terms of making sure the client was aware of everything they should be aware of prior to engaging. The FCA are doing the same thing now. So again, look at your advice process to make sure all of the disclosures that need to be in place are done up front. Vulnerability, vulnerable clients. Has vulnerability been assessed and recorded on file? Is this something that's part of your protection advice process? Is there a reason why the client's asking for protection advice? Is there a reason why you're providing protection advice? Is there a vulnerable nature to that? So again, something we see an awful lot of when it comes to investment and protection advice is that vulnerability is recorded really well, but when it comes to protection advice, it's very often not recorded at all. So again, making sure that you've covered all of these bases as part of that discussion point. So the main things that we see advisors falling down on, and we'll talk a bit about the positives in a minute. Know your customer, so fact finding. So actually not covering off any other protection needs. The fact finding isn't detailed enough in terms of breakdown of expenditure to confirm needs and affordability. Disclosures, so suitability reports, issues post cooling off period. So actually when it comes to, again, the other side of things in terms of investments and pensions, these are provided up front to a client before they decide to go ahead. But when it comes to mortgages and protection, quite often they're provided after the application form's been completed. Now, if that's not sent to a client within the cooling off period, then a client could potentially go straight on risk and not have the ability to cool off when they realise what's in it. So making sure that happens immediately in terms of timescales, and actually making sure the cancellation rights are within the suitability report. You shouldn't be signposting clients to a separate document to find out what their cancellation rights are. It should be within that suitability report up front, so a client says, great, I now know I've got however many days it is to decide whether I want to go ahead with this. And that will obviously differ based on different types of insurance, different types of advice. So making sure that it's clear, not asking them to go look at another document. And making sure, sorry, I've just clicked on there, the commission not making the report and illustration. So actually making sure that we've got consistency in terms of any rates that are there, and not, again, asking the client and signposting the client to a separate document to go and get some information. It should be there and up front for them. Process, so not actually clarifying the reasoning for the selected protection and not including the supporting research for the choice of provider. Now, I imagine most people are using some form of sourcing system when it comes to protection advice. The file doesn't often have that, or if for whatever reason you're not recommending the most cost efficient, cheapest provider, well, why isn't that? That's not to say cheapest is best, but if you're not going to be doing that, the regulator or FOS, if there was a complaint, would say, well, actually, what were the reasons for going down to this particular one? So notes, details on file, the client doesn't need to know necessarily, but you should have reasoning behind it that demonstrates why you did what you did. A replacement business. So we talked a bit about cost cutting, and actually are there ways and means in terms of you being able to save some clients some money? They're looking at their budgets. So if you are going to be looking at replacing an existing policy, getting those details on file. Now, thankfully, I think over the last few years, protection policies haven't, or in terms of benefits provided, haven't dropped off as much as they did. But if I think back to my early days of giving critical illness advice back in the early 2000s, the definition was cancer, heart attack, nice and straightforward. Well, you wouldn't be able to replace one of those. Now you've got a list of exclusions or very, very specifics. So again, making sure you've understood what the client's giving up in terms of benefits before replacing it, and making sure that's documented on file. If a client is looking to cut costs and is happy to reduce the benefits they've got to do so, make sure that's documented and make sure you're covered. Because if the client has an illness that was covered and the new under the old policy and it's not covered under the new one, we're probably going to have a problem on our hands if that wasn't disclosed and discussed. So again, really making sure that that is upfront and clear for anybody to see. From a protection point of view for you, excuse the pun. Disclosure necessities. So what do clients need to have in terms of the information you've provided to them, and how do you go about doing that? So the requirements. Client agreement on file. Again, we talked about this, I'd mentioned it a second ago, but we see it time and time again where this doesn't happen. From a GDPR perspective, clients, especially with protection advice, are going to be giving you very, very sensitive data. You need to make sure that they are aware of what you're going to do with that data. So I would suggest either your privacy policy, privacy notice is within your client agreement, or the client is in receipt of that if it's kept somewhere else. The commission, the cancellation rights or period, the level of cover. Be amazed how many new business files we see where the level of cover isn't actually covered within the suitability report. The premium and any advantages and disadvantages. Now I'll come on to advantages and disadvantages in a second when it comes to suitability reports. But again, a lot of people, when it comes to protection advice, don't give this as much time and attention as needed, and actually are just quoting generic features of a policy rather than the advantage of taking one policy over another, or the disadvantage of taking one policy over another. So it could be that you need to start to list a bit more detail as to why you've gone for a cheaper option, which actually could be a disadvantage. And then the key features of the policy and any known exclusions. Sounds simple, sounds basic. Some of you will be going, I don't understand why this isn't on file. As I say, we check, best part of 200 new business files every month, and these are things that come up on a regular basis. Thankfully getting better with the feedback that we're able to provide, but making sure you've covered this off when you are giving protection advice, especially if you're going to be doing the more specialist type stuff, especially if this is going to be linked to IHT and estate planning, because obviously there are wider elements to that in terms of tax and trusts. But please, 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 these are things that we see day in, day out, and we are things that we know that FOS, when it comes to complaints or finding against firms, are very, very key on picking up. Most FOS findings and complaints that find against a firm are for poor process rather than poor suitability. So actually the process and the disclosure requirements that were there aren't covered off as well as they could have been done, and FOS would say that actually the client wasn't in receipt of all of the information they needed to have before making the decision to proceed. It's not because the advice was unsuitable. So just focus on that, because I think there's too much onus is given to, well, we know the advice was right, therefore we're covered. That's not really how it works in the real world. This is about you covering your backsides and making sure the file tells the full story. Okay, suitability report, which is the bit that I'd like to give a little bit more focus to. Quick chat, poll, or people to put a quick note in. Who's happy with their suitability reports? Who is actually sitting here today thinking, do you know what, we're really happy that the suitability reports we provide when it comes to protection advice are fit for purpose and are written with the end recipient in mind? Whilst I finish my coffee. Okay, I'd like to see a first one saying yes. Oh, this is good news. This is what I like. Yeses. Could do better. Yes, but open to improvement. Something we're going to have to do as part of Consumer Duty. And I don't know how many people have looked into this, but this is the area that I would suggest when it comes to protection. But actually, generally, firms have got most work to do, is actually the consumer understanding piece. Again, when it comes to insurance policies, the regulator is concerned that consumers enter into contracts they don't understand. Now, I appreciate that we're not going to ask them to be able to have the same level of understanding as you have. That's your job. Your job is that you provide the advice. They come to you because they trust you. That doesn't mean to say the consumer shouldn't understand what they've got. I will never forget working in HSBC back in 2002, 2003. And I got asked to go to meet a client who had come to the front desk and was talking to one of the cashiers, and he hadn't been very well. And she said, Christian, I think you need to talk to him because it seems to me like he's got a critical illness policy. Went and had a very brief conversation with him. The guy had had a heart attack about 3 or 4 weeks before, had no idea that he was insured. He'd just taken out this policy however many years before and been paying 70 something pounds a month, which back in 2002 was a fair amount of money, and didn't know what he had. He didn't understand it. The good news was that we put him on the phone to the underwriters and to the claims department, and a few weeks later, £300,000 was paid out, and he was back in work however long later. but the guy didn't understand what he had. Now, I'm not saying the advisor that had given the advice hadn't done the job properly, but something had gone wrong. Now, for me, the easiest way we can do this, because you as advisors do this day in, day out already, you vary your oral communications with your clients every single time you speak to them, because you are reading the room. You understand whether you're going to go up in terms of technicality or you're going to go down in terms of simplicity. But invariably, the reports that go out to clients look very, very similar. Now, I know that that's because too many suitability reports have been written by or have come from legal and compliance people. But actually, Consumer Duty is going to put the onus back on you to consider the end recipient. So if you determine that a client has a low level of financial understanding, my suggestion would be that you need to write to a client in a different way than you write to a client who's got a high level of understanding. Again, I hate to keep on saying this because this is a protection session, but the wealth and the investment and pension side of things, knowledge and experience is a key factor of an assessment up front. Doesn't happen in protection as much. But why? If a client doesn't understand and you're having to explain things in a very simple way, but you write to them in exactly the same way as you wrote to a client who knows this and could have gone and bought it themselves, but they just happen to be using you for whatever reason, then that's not really going to work. So again, something that I think all firms need to consider is actually, are our suitability reports fit for purpose? Are they doing what they need to do? Anybody that's heard me talk about Consumer Duty will know that I still have a hankering for reason why letters. What was wrong with the reason why letter? What was wrong with actually giving the client the information they need and the reason why you're giving the advice you're giving? I'm not saying we can get back to, back of fag packet type suitability reports, but I do think we need to really think about how we are writing to our clients in terms of the reasons why the advice is suitable for them and the key bits of information that we need. So again, something that I think that can be done better is objectives. We talked about it at the start. We talked about understanding a client's needs. But actually, have you got a true understanding of the client's needs and objectives, and is that documented on file? Because that's what we and anybody else reading that file will go back to think, well, why does the end solution match what they're trying to achieve? When it comes to mortgage advice and mortgage protection, that's fairly straightforward normally. That said, are we just providing the bare minimum, or actually have we identified a shortfall in other areas? Are the objectives listed on file a regurgitation of your recommendation? Again, sadly, this is something we see time and time again. The objectives are just key features of the product. They're not actually client objectives. They're not in the client's own words. They're not talking about what their wants, their dreams, their concerns are. This should be about the individual, and they should be completely different for every single person. I appreciate that obviously some might be fairly similar, but these should be different. And when a regulator or when anybody looks at suitability reports and they are templated and they look exactly the same, every single thing exactly the same, they pick up and say, actually, this wasn't written to anybody individual. Someone's put a question here saying object. Oh yeah, good points. Well spotted, actually. Thank you. The proofreading yesterday clearly wasn't as good as it should have been. But yeah, client objectives are very, very key. And I think we really need to get back to making sure that we have some very, very clear client objectives on file as to what they're trying to achieve. So how are you then going to demonstrate that the recommendation meets the client's needs? If you've identified a need as part of shortfall analysis, as part of budgeting, as part of a cash flow model, if that's what you've done to identify needs, how do you then demonstrate that the recommendation meets the client's needs? For us, it's about looking at the client's tax position, looking at whether trust were needed as part of that, and actually looking at then you've got situations in terms of the will or any policies that need to be assigned. So these are things that, again, we see talked about and potentially discussed in the report, but actually not implemented. So what systems have you got in place within your business to ensure that where the needs and where the objectives are identified, that actually the solution is provided? Are trust documents quite often sent out after the event but never come back? If they're not signed, then there's no point even talking about them. But has the advisor potentially already moved on and isn't quite as key on making sure these things are done? So again, just thinking about processes, thinking about the advice journey, and thinking about making sure that all of the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed as part of this. Costs. How are we identifying from a cost perspective? If something's more expensive, is the client incurring it for good reason? Again, thinking about consumer duty and poor outcomes, which is what the regulator's trying to stop. There are too many instances where the client is receiving poor value for money for the products that they're paying for. Now, again, I don't believe that's the case for anybody on this call, but is the cost of the insurance or the protection being provided relevant to the client's needs? Because if a client's paying far too much for something they're really not going to get any benefit from, then they shouldn't be having it. Your job is to demonstrate that, and that's part of the consumer duty piece now, is to carry out a fair value assessment on anything you're doing. Are the providers you're working with the cheapest? Is there a cheaper option that does exactly the same thing? If it doesn't, demonstrate that. So again, when it comes to the suitability report, or potentially even a file note, this doesn't all need to go in the suitability report to try and cut down what goes to the client, but really documenting your reasons why you're doing what you're doing. And then obviously, as I just said, do the policy features outweigh the additional cost? If it's cheaper, is the client given a valuable benefit? So again, just making sure you've covered yourselves in terms of the benefits that the client's going to get from whatever the policy may be, as far as their objectives and needs. But they should all link back to what's the client trying to achieve and what are their needs. If it doesn't, then in reality, how are we demonstrating that? Advantages and disadvantages. So again, as I alluded to it a little bit earlier, a lot of the time we see very, very generic statements in terms of advantages and disadvantages. So it'll just talk about policy features, whereas actually they should be looking at what's the client trying to achieve and how is this recommendation going to help them, and are there any things to consider? So it could be that actually a client is given up a current benefit, but this policy is cheaper. Are we seeing that as an advantage or a disadvantage? Is it that actually by paying slightly more, they get something that does something slightly different? This should be very, very specific to a client. There might be some that are consistent across lots of pieces of advice, but actually these should be more detailed in terms of understanding what a client's trying to achieve. So what does good look like? When it comes to suitability reports, strong client objectives, an assessment and statement of needs, a robust research process. This doesn't all need to be in the report necessarily, can be on file. And then what other options were considered. So you demonstrating that actually you've thought about all of the different ways that their objectives could be achieved, and you've recommended the most appropriate advice. Again, I'm not saying this is aimed at anyone on this call, but time and time again, it feels when reading a file that the advisor is order taking. Client says they want this, therefore I did it. The client's coming to you for advice. Your job is to make a recommendation. Therefore, your job is to consider different ways that can be done. If a client is just asking for something, then in reality, why aren't they just doing it themselves? And if all you're going to do is provide what they've asked for, in my view, you're not carrying out your role as an advisor and are open to future issues in terms of avoiding causing foreseeable harm, because your job is to spot something and think about another way of doing this. And then an audit trail. So actually, does the audit trail in terms of how you've arrived at the recommendation match the advice journey? And if it doesn't, does the advice journey need to be amended? What doesn't need to be included in a suitability report? Something, again, we see lots of situations where people reconfirm client circumstances. Now, I'm not suggesting you don't want to make sure you've got these things right, but there are probably more appropriate ways than having 2 pages of clients' personal details on the front of a report. They know their date of birth, they know they're married or divorced, they know what their earnings are. If you've already asked the client to complete a fact find, is that being done through a client portal? If that's the case, could the fact find that you've completed be saved in the client portal so the client can have a chance to review it? If you're concerned that actually you've got the wrong details, I think the suitability report's probably a bit late anyway, because the advice has probably been provided. So it doesn't need to be there. If you choose to do it, that's entirely up to you. We would suggest it doesn't need to be there. Well, sorry, we know it doesn't need to be there. We would suggest that's probably not the right place to do it. And a summary of main consequences and any possible disadvantages of the transaction. So how can you cover off the main consequences possible and the disadvantages by using the advantages and disadvantages rather than a very generic front page or front couple of pages that doesn't really tell the client anything that they need to know. So the client's demands and needs, how do we get that right? Explanation of why the firms concluded the recommendation. and any possible disadvantages. This needs to be very specific to your client. So how on earth do we demonstrate this in a suitable way? So just think about how your reports are structured. And for me, this is the really important piece here. The way, especially when it comes to consumer understanding, something we've been doing within our business for a long time now is having a front page summary, which actually covers off exactly what you're doing, why you're doing it. Sorry, what you're doing. So costs, provider, nature of the transaction, for a client to go, great, I understand that what we're putting in place. So help set the scene in terms of what the rest of the report is there to do. The main report, I still like to call this the reason why letter. So actually, why are we doing what we're doing? The key points clients need to understand. Anything that in reality they should know as part of giving the advice is there and it's ready, and the client can see that in nice, simple terms. Nothing on the last page that should be on the front page. Costs, commissions, whatever it may be. And then the appendices, which for me is quite often your research. Now, this is where you might start to tailor your report structure to think about different types of clients, because some of those appendices for the client who has a want or a need to understand the nitty gritty might well end up in the main report, and for clients who have a less of an understanding and less knowledge in terms of what's going on might actually be taken out of there. So again, think about how you're going to structure this for the different types of clients you deal with, the different types of protection you provide, or the different nature of the advice you're giving. That's the structure that we've been putting in place. Now, obviously, when it comes to Consumer Duty, we're doing a lot of work at the moment on all of our client documentation and so forth. But actually, so if you're a client of ours, then you will see some changes coming on those anyway. If you're not, this for me is what I would suggest when it comes to protection advice at the moment. A lot of your time and effort will be spent in terms of demonstrating that you've taken the client circumstance into consideration and thought about the consumer understanding with the communication you're giving. Some examples in terms of the summary of the advice. So one-page summary, nice and simple, really straightforward. So actually a client can see exactly what's there. One pages specifically, keeping it one pager. So actually lots of clients will just read that and go, great, that's you've told me that's what we're doing. I understand what's going on. Most clients, I would hope, get into the main body of the report and really start to understand why you're doing what you're doing. So this for me is the bit that we want to get clients. And I appreciate, lots of clients don't read suitability reports, but I think some of that is because they're 40-something pages long and it doesn't really feel relevant to them. If a client's not reading this, then there's something gone wrong in my view. But that's where you can really start to drill down into the nitty gritty of why you're doing what you're doing and anything the client has to have as part of this. And then the appendices. So this is the bit in terms of your research. So, let's make sure that actually there's nothing in here that needed to go in the main bit of the report, and actually anything else, this is your research piece. So each compliance department's got its own interpretation of what needs to be in there. So you might need to talk about this internally as to what's necessary. You might need to determine what is already is a repetition of something that's already on file and the client has had, and you can demonstrate it. It might be that all of this information is already contained within another document that the client's already in receipt of. I think this is your chance to think about how do you get this right. Nothing that the client needs to understand should be in the appendices. This should be the bit where you're just demonstrating how you've done that. I would hope that these can start to be reduced. We did some work with a firm recently. It wasn't on protection advice, it was actually on defined benefit advice, but we got their suitability template down from 50-something pages to 20-something pages, because actually they realized that a lot of this information was already contained in other documents the client had received. And we weren't signposting them. This is something that they needed to have up front. So if you're feeling that this actually is compliance heavy and actually has too much in there for a client to understand, then think about whether it's relevant. If the client's not going to be able to understand it, then why are they getting it? If they need to have it, but it's being written in such a way that they don't understand it, then we need to look at what's coming from that. We've obviously had Royal London on this morning. We've got Legal and General coming on later. Something I would be doing as part of all of my Consumer Duty work right now with providers is asking them about their client documentation. We all know that a lot of the issues here come from provider-led literature that actually doesn't really do what it needs to do. So start talking to them about what they're doing for you. Anybody that was at the PFS conference back in November last year and went to any of the Consumer Duty sessions, lots of the providers put their hands up and said they knew they had as much work, if not more work to do than advice firms in terms of the consumer understanding piece, because again, their literature has been written by lawyers and compliance people and is pages and pages and pages of information that the client just doesn't understand. So hopefully we get back to a point where this is able to, we're able to actually signpost clients to something that's going to be relevant to them and they're going to understand and use. Again, have these conversations with providers now. Financial Ombudsman spoken that an advisor cannot rely on a risk warning that's on page 26 of a report if the client's unlikely to have lost the will to live while reading it. So again, just think to yourself, is there something in the report that the client's not going to get to because they've gone through so many things they don't understand, they've stopped reading it. The adage of more is more when it comes to protecting yourself when it comes to litigation or future complaints doesn't work. FOS just stands up and says, we stopped reading at page 16, so how on earth was the client going to go to page 42? If there's something they need to know, get it up front, get it really, really key so a client can't say, I didn't read it, I didn't understand it. When it comes to consumer duty, one of the things that firms are going to have to do is assess consumer understanding. So actually, how are you going to assess the consumer understanding piece within your firm? Gregor touched a bit upon things like persistency rates, client cancellations, customer surveys. Is that sufficient? Are you going to be able to use that? Or actually, are you going to have to do something where you're going to ask clients to demonstrate they've understood the nature of the transaction? If your report doesn't help you, then that's certainly not going to help that assessment. So again, start thinking about how your report will work in that light. And last but not least, on the suitability reports and the appendices, so making sure that actually you've talked about all of the key things that are there, and there's nothing more than generic matters. So nothing that a client needs to understand before deciding to proceed. So how to close off a new business file. So if you're putting a business file together today and you're thinking, great, how do I know I've done this well? How am I going to assess whether this is now ready to go to advice, for file checking, for closing off the file because the advice has been concluded? Ask yourself, is there sufficient evidence of KYC? Is there sufficient evidence on here that any independent third party, be that internal compliance, be that another colleague who does peer review, independent file checking like us, the FCA if they do an information request, FOS if there becomes a problem, is there information in your head that's not on the file that actually is relevant to the decision being made? Does the recommendation meet the client's demands and needs? Is there a demand and needs statement? Are there questions on it, or is it an order take, or could it appear to be an order take? Does the research on file support the recommendation made? So are we able to really show that exactly how and why you've recommended what you've done? Do the illustrations and applications match the recommendation? Again, this is something we see a lot of where there's inconsistencies. And have I disclosed all of the key information in a format that is easily understood by the client or any third party? So again, it's not necessarily what you've done, it's how you present it. So is it presented in such a way that actually clients and anybody else can understand it and read it? So again, looking at your advice process, is it clear as to how you've got there? That's it from me in terms of today's session. Just a couple of things that were coming out in terms of the Verve group over the next few weeks and months. We've got a whole host of events coming up, which we'll making sure you guys are aware of. Keep an eye on our website. The idea being is that we want to be trying to cover off lots of different areas of CPD for firms this year. If there's anything in particular that people are wanting or needing when it comes to CPD, I know, again, this is protection based today, but a lot of people have been asking questions with regards to the changes in taxation when it comes to bonds and dividends and GIAs and so forth. We ran a session on that recently. Anything anybody wants right now, please tell us, because we want to be putting on sessions that are relevant to you, not necessarily just what we think are relevant to us. I think Jazz has just put a message in the chat saying if you want to use the next 10 minutes whilst we're having a break to sign up to any of these, please feel free to do so. Most of our events, I think, for the year are now in the calendar. So feel free to have a look at those in the next break and see what you feel is relevant. And please send me a message, send Jazz a message. If there are areas that you want covered that you can't see covered, tell us, because we'll go out and find them. Any questions? I think I'm a few minutes early because we've had no questions, but I'm conscious I covered off a lot of that, and I please don't think that I'm trying to be negative here. This is trying to help you guys be better, and we're just going to be using the information we've seen here. There's lots of good protection advice being provided, but we think it can be done better, and I think with Consumer Duty, sadly, it's going to have to be done better. So if there's anything anybody wants to raise collectively, please feel free to do so now. Anything anybody wants to raise individually with me, then just drop me a line afterwards. No? Okay, fab. Well, we're bang on 11. If we come back in 10 minutes, and we'll be ready for the next session, which is with Legal and General. See you all shortly. Hello, hello. Just checking people are back. Thankfully, one of the important people's back. I can see Nikki with her camera on. That's quite useful. Morning, Nikki.
Good morning.
How are we?
Very well, thank you. A little bit chilly, but very well.
I know I can't quite work out what's going on with the temperature. I'm either too hot or I'm too cold, and
I've just been permanently cold
I'll be
for the
really
last
honest.
2 weeks.
I'm normally sat with a hoodie on, so I'm normally a little bit warmer than this. But so morning to Stuart, morning to Nikki. Just checking that everyone else is back. I saw a couple of people raise their hands that they can hear us and we're good to go. I'm going to pass over the reins to Legal and General for the next session. Making sure everyone can see screens. I can see Stuart's screen. You've got actually Stuart. You've managed to do it twice, which is quite clever. Like that. Good work, guys. Over to you. I'll be listening in, so I'll probably have some questions for you at the end. But I shall pass the reins across.
Lovely, thank you, and good morning, everyone. We're glad to be here today, and as you can see on screen, we're going to be talking about this sort of protection policies, opportunities within the sort of estate planning space. So following on really quite well from the couple of sessions so far this morning from Gregor and Christian, discussing sort of consumer duty and how that may well change the sort of landscape for yourselves, and really wanting to kind of look at the opportunities that that you have available to you with your sort of wealth clients, in terms of sort of protection and the opportunities that present themselves there. We discussed back in the summer session that we were part of using cash flow modelling as a tool to identify those protection opportunities, as Christian stated, and actually we're working on something quite exciting. So there was a question in the chat I saw regarding protection only advice and any tools available. So sort of watch this space for something from Legal and General coming in due course, I'll say. Legal and General, we've got loads of tools and calculators to help you with your protection advice, and then we're going to be adding to that sort of as we get into a little bit further into the year. So yeah, watch this space. I know, exciting. So I'm going to hand over to Stuart, who is going to kind of focus the session in on kind of areas around IHT planning and whole of life, gifts and that sort of thing, and looking at obviously the sort of protection opportunities within that space. So without further ado, over to you, Stuart.
Excellent. Cheers, Nikki. So, good morning, everybody. As Nikki says, I'm going to cover off the IHT side. I shall turn my camera off, save the broadband a little bit. Let's concentrate on just the slides. Today's session really is aimed at bringing that whole IHT side of things to life, and identifying the protection opportunity. I'm talking about protection. By necessity, though, there is quite a bit of techie information in there, so some of the small print that goes with IHT. But we'll try and keep it away from getting too bogged down in the detail. If you do have any questions, as you have been doing, or comments, feel free, stick them through on the chat box. We've allowed plenty of time at the end to look at some of those questions, and get into some of the opportunities. As Nikki said, our session last year was looking at the wealth focus. We were trying to help advisors in that marketplace identify those protection opportunities. And as we've just heard, the consumer duty, it's really coming along. It's really going to focus people's minds on making sure that people are protected. So for this session, we're going to look at making sure you understand how IHT works. but beyond just the everybody pays 40% tax if they've got more than the nil rate band. We'll get into a bit more detail. Look at some of those exemptions, some of those reliefs that could apply to people, which does lead us on to talking about gifts as well. Looking at some of the solutions or situations where people need protection policies, because that's a great solution. If they take it out early enough, it could be a really cost-effective solution. And we'll look at some of the areas where you can help your clients with their IHT planning. Or if they've already done their IHT planning, help them with the protection planning around it. Well, let's consider that wealth situation first. Many of us, self-included, always have a discussion with our advisors around wealth. Personally, I'll talk to my advisor around pensions or investments. Always want to know how big's the pot. Usually the answer is never big enough. But always want to know, is it growing? Am I on the right track? That's what my focus is whenever I'm talking about those areas. Because I'm looking forward to the future. You know, at retirement, off doing loads of trips and travels and hobbies and that kind of thing. I'm never thinking about the protection though. Now, thankfully, my advisor always asks, have you got enough in place in case it all goes wrong? What if you're in an accident, lose your ability to earn your income? Have you got some income protection? What if you get the shock diagnosis of a significant illness? Are you having the same discussions with your clients, even though their mind is thinking about building up the pots, enjoying their lives, having those holidays? That's where their mindset is. Let's challenge them back. Make sure they've covered the what ifs. Because really, when it comes to talking about protection, there are so many opportunities that actually it becomes a case of, well, when shouldn't we talk about protection? Yeah, family protection, obvious place to start as people are starting out in their lives, trying to grow their wealth. The cohabiting couple, still that perception. They can pass stuff between cohabiting couples and be exempt from IHT. It's not the same as being married. Common law doesn't mean it's exempt. Of course, we're focusing on the IHT, the wealth side today. Single lives. One of the biggest growth areas out there is later life divorce. Highest rate of divorce is in the over 55s. So there's a significant opportunity when we're looking at older age clients to think about their protection needs. If their personal lives are taking a significant change, then they need some protection. And then we've got the opportunities such as business protection, relevant life plans. Again, they all need some protection, but they're all often focused in different areas. Let's bring that focus back. Challenge with the what ifs. So our discussions last time were largely focused on the accumulation side of wealth. So that's when you're earning your money, you're building up your savings, probably got mortgages, debts, etc. Hopefully putting money away for your pensions. And that's really where cash flow modelling does come to life. I know it's mentioned in the previous sessions. I know we mentioned last year. As you can see, we use Voyant's model for our slides that we did last year. As Nicky said, we're in the process of building one that's focusing just on the protection needs. So no confusions around investments and investment performance. We're focusing on that protection opportunity, but with a cash flow model around it to show the need and the benefits. That's in the coming soon bracket. It's not coming next week, I hasten to add, it's not that soon. I've actually got a few more bits to do on it. Our focus today is that decumulation side of things. This is when you're starting to draw down your pension, starting to do the things that you want to enjoy out of life. But the complications or the opportunities from a protection perspective that come in there, well, it's things like bank of mum and dad. How often do you come across parents putting money towards the kids to help with the deposit for the house or even buying houses, but help with them with the start in life? How often are they having to use their savings to help their kids out? Or have they not got sufficient themselves and having to access things like lifetime mortgages? Or if they've got sufficient wealth, then we're looking at the IHT side of things. So that's really our focus today, is on that latter part where people start to enjoy things. But many people think, well, there isn't actually much protection needs there. Well, as we start and delve a little bit deeper, you'll see there are plenty of protection needs. We need to take the goggles off, get them to realise all the potential opportunities or potential risks that they could face. Think about those longer term issues. And of course, when it comes to retirement, there's not a single plan anymore. Most people save for their pensions. They're often looking to use a mixture of pensions and investments and cash and maybe their property. So we'll give a plug for our later life department later on. Because an awful lot of this side of the equation, the decumulation, is when we start to talk about intergenerational planning. But how do we actually bring that to life when we're talking to our clients? If we start thinking about IHT, well, that's the obvious place to start with intergenerational, because we're passing it from one generation to the next, the whole wealth transfer. But think about it from a practical point of view. What goes on at people at this stages of their lives? Well, often they're paying for school fees, maybe for their own kids, maybe for the grandkids. Maybe they're paying university fees, which are huge for anybody who's had kids that have gone to university. Or maybe they're supporting them through university, paying the rental costs or guaranteeing the rent on student accommodation. I've been there, which is quite a scary situation when you think you're guaranteeing the rent for just your child in their property. But when you read the small print, you suddenly realise you're guaranteeing the rent for the whole property. Significantly different thinking about one person versus the 10 people in that house. But that's often where that intergenerational starts to come to life, because actually you might be advising me, but my focus is on helping my daughter. Are you going to be in a situation to advise her? Am I going to value your advice enough to pass your details on to the next generation? And we had some scary research come out of our later life department survey. When they looked at a load of their clients, they found that 65% of those who inherit money as part of an estate actually leave the original advisor. They decide to go somewhere else. But 3/4 of those go on to take financial advice. So it's not that they don't need it, they just made a choice to use somebody else. Are your clients, kids, grandkids, etc., going to value your advice enough? Are you building those relationships soon enough? Now, I would do a hands up who's come across the bank of mum and dad, but I know most of you will have done. And of course, we're on a virtual one without the cameras on, so won't be able to see if you put your hands up anyway. Most people have come across Bank of Mum and Dad. L&G does a piece of research every couple of years. We haven't done it for, as you can see, since August 2020. But at that point, we found that the average support from the parents to the kids was about 20,000. I've seen plenty of articles in the press quoting 40, 50, 60,000 being not uncommon. And talking to advisors around the country, there are some very rich parents who are giving their kids 4, 5, 600,000 towards their deposit for their properties. But if the parents can give that much away, have the parents got a massive estate? Therefore, they've got an IHT problem, potentially. And if they're giving the kids, say, 500,000, well, they've just exceeded the nil rate band. And the question's got to be, is it a gift to the kids? In which case, we've got a potentially exempt transfer. That liability would fall on the kids if the parent was to die within 7 years. How's the kids going to pay it? So do we need to be talking about to the kids about their need for a GIV policy? And we'll look at that a little bit later on. Or are the parents intending it to be a loan and they actually want the money back? So again, if it is a loan, I know they might not explicitly say that, but if they're expecting the money back, what security, what protection have the kids got to make sure they're in a position that whatever life throws at them, they can repay their parents? So even something as simple as Bank of Mum and Dad, which is intergenerational planning in practice, leads to an opportunity. You should be talking to both the parents and the kids. Let's build those relationships. Let's grow your client bank. Let's make sure that those future generations are protected from both an IHT point of view, but also from a normal protection perspective. Now, as we focus in on IHT, we need to start thinking about the rules around intestate. There are loads and loads of different sales aids around intestate, and this was the simplest one I could find. Some get awfully complicated and just seem to go on for page after page. But the first point, if you're starting to think about your estate, you're starting to think about wealth planning, passing it on to the next generation, well, have you got a will in place for a start? If you haven't, then if you're married, proceeds of your estate are going to head towards your kids. Your spouse will get a large proportion, be able to live off the interest, etc., but they don't automatically get everything if you've got kids. But if you haven't got a will in place, then your estate starts to pass on to your kids, and if they're not there, it goes on to your parents, to your siblings, to your grandparents, distant relatives. Ultimately, if there's nothing in place, the estate will end up inheriting your estate. How many of your clients could honestly say they really want their estate to be passed on to their siblings, aunties, uncles, etc.? Let's make sure they've started with the basics. Get the will in place. Let's make sure we know what their intentions are. Because once you know their intentions and the expected outcomes, that's where you can put in place the protection to meet the needs. Again, there's loads of information out there about IHT. We've even got sections on Legal & General's Advisor Centre. But actually, a good independent resource I found was the Which Guides. Don't have to be a member of Which to look at all these guides, and they've got real sort of plain English common sense guides around IHT, but also starting to move into inheritance tax on property and gifts and the likes. Because at the end of the day, we've all potentially got an inheritance tax to pay, because the standard rate of inheritance tax is 40% above any element of your estate that's above the nil rate band, which is currently 325,000. Now, there are some additional exemptions. So there's the residence nil rate band, which is another 175,000 if you're passing on your property to your kids or your grandkids. So it's only on that element. And if we think about the values of property these days, it continues to keep, but just doesn't slow down, does it really? It seems to continue to go up anyway, especially if you live down south, down in the southeast. You're going to quickly start and break some of these nil rate bands, or the property residence nil rate band, which is on top. Now, they are transferable between a couple. So whilst I've got a nil rate band of 325 plus the residence nil rate band of 175, that gives me 500,000. So is my wife. So it actually comes into effect on the death of both of us. So we've got a potential maximum of $1 million. Anything above that is going to be taxed at 40%. The resident nil rate band, that applies to your property only. Obviously, if your estate's below those limits, then you're not paying any IHT. On my death, if everything goes to my wife, then there's no IHT there. It'll apply when she dies. If I'd already died years ago, then there's a way for her to claim the nil rate band that wasn't used on my death to then apply it after she's died. Obviously, if you're only single, then you've only got 500,000, not the $1 million. But it is a growing problem. So this is the government's own statistics. This is their take on IHT and their projected expected take going forwards. So you can see a slight sort of pause in the 2019, 2020, 21. That's the whole COVID thing. Things seem to go a little bit haywire there, but they are expecting it to continue to grow. And you can see that their next expectation for the government is to be taking in over £6 billion in IHT receipts. And whilst the last available figures for the average IHT is 2018 to 19, It's over £200,000 paid. They're predicting that in the 2022 to 23 year, that the average IHT paid is going to be almost 270,000. Yes, there's quite an awful lot of money to be passing on to the government, especially when there's ways of being in a position that you don't have to pay that. And that's what we want to help our clients. Let's make sure they don't pay something that's at times unnecessary to pay, or that they've got alternative solutions in place. There is regional variance. We all know that. It's largely aligned with property values because that makes such up a large proportion of your estate. But I guess even though we know there's regional variance, the one thing it highlights is there's no region of the country where there isn't an IHT need or an IHT problem. And bear in mind the figures on this page, they're for the year 2018 to 19. Just think what change has been in house prices and people's values of their estates over the last few years. These are the most recent figures that were available. That's the only reason we're quoting those ones. There are some surprising figures as you start to get into the detail. So whilst it's a potential problem for all of us, actually the number of estates taxed, again, we're back to 2018-19, as I say, it's the latest figures from the government, but the number of estates who actually faced a tax was over 22,000 estates. It is a small proportion of the actual deaths in the UK. In fact, only 3.7% of the deaths in the UK that will face an IHT problem. But again, whilst it's a small proportion, it's a large amount of money. And if we look at those where they've used things like the residence nil rate band, use the transferable nil rate bands, that's transfer between spouses, you can see it's a large proportion of people already using those, and we've still got 22,000 estates being taxed. Let's make sure that we start to reduce that number being taxed. It'd be great if we could give the taxman a problem. And there are some areas where there are reliefs. You may have come across some of these terms, but you may not know the detail. So I guess the first two on the left-hand side, they're probably the most common that most people have heard of. So business property relief or business relief. There are loads of rules as you get into the detail, but it's things like you can get 100% business relief, so 100% of the value of the business would be exempt from IHT where the shares are owned in an unlisted company. So this isn't shares in Legal and General, this is shares in a small business. Might qualify for 100% relief, so it might be exempt from being part of their estate. Might only get 50% if they own shares in that business and their personal share ownership is more than half of the shares, so they've got controlling interest in the business. Or they might have 50% relief if they own the land or the buildings or the machine that the business uses. So they might not own the business outright, but they might own the building. So it can get quite complex when people are owning business assets as part of their estate. But I guess the good news is part of that could be totally exempt from the IHT or half of the value. So you can reduce their IHT liability straight away. When it comes to agricultural relief, I mean, this is all about being in a position to pass on farms down generations and pass on agricultural buildings. So not surprisingly, it relates to farms, buildings, land, and the value. So again, they can get 100% relief. So often for small farms where they're growing crops or they've got land being used for crops or for farm animals and the likes, the buildings, the cottages, the farmhouses, the barns, they can all be exempt. Some areas don't know actually qualify for the exemption. So that might be the actual animals on the land themselves. The land is, but not the animals. So again, you can have some additional complications. But some of the less common ones, so woodland relief. If part of somebody's estate is a wood, an ancient woodland or even a new woodland, then that could well be exempt. Now, the revenue does get a little bit vague on what is or isn't exempt when it comes to woodlands and some of the heritage works. They seem to want to have a bit more of a discussion to get into the detail. But very often the land part of woodlands is exempt if it's a working wood, growing trees for paper, say. So the land might be exempt, but the trees themselves, the crop, isn't. So again, you have to get into that level of detail with the actual revenue to understand where that relief applies. But I guess there's not many people that would personally own a wood. They might own it as a business. So it might be back to the business property relief rather than looking at a wood relief. And then lastly, national heritage. This is where people are passing on objects to become part of the national heritage. So if you were to give if you owned an estate, like a stately home type thing, and passed it on to the National Trust, then that can be exempt, or the land, or the paintings, or something that's of real historical interest. They can be exempt. So again, you can take away the value from somebody's overall estate. Easiest place to find out about these, as you need to get into the detail, is to go on the government website. Whilst there's lots of small print, lots of little rules, they are quite clearly laid out. It's literally having to work through a set of guided notes, if you like. For most clients, I guess the most common one we see is the business property relief, a little bit of the agricultural relief. So what we're really trying to put in place is some kind of cost-effective solution to meet that IHT problem. So let's think about it practically. Yeah, if I was to die, then there's an estate. My estate needs to be distributed. So there'll be an executor, and they're there to make sure it gets passed on and distributed. And they can't actually do that role of sorting out the will until probate's been sorted. And of course, once probate's sorted, then any IHT owing can be paid to the HMRC. How long does probate take? Well, that's a totally different debate. That really does depend on how complex the estate is. But the taxman, HMRC, is expecting estates to pay their IHT within 6 months. Go beyond 6 months, they're going to start charging interest. Now, even a relatively simple estate can take more than 6 months to sort out. Sorting out all the assets, selling property, etc., sorting out probate. Well, that could be a challenge for the estate if they've got to pay their IHT. What we can do, though, is put a life policy in place, but put it under trust so that the policy amounts go to the beneficiaries. It is then outside of somebody's estate. Because it's under trust, technically utilising a trust, you're giving it away. It's no longer part of your assets. So if I have a policy, it's under trust, let's say beneficiary is going to be my daughter, so it's under trust for her. The physical act of putting that policy under trust means it's no longer mine. So when it comes to working out my estate, well, that policy is irrelevant. It's no longer mine, so it's not part of my estate. So it doesn't get dragged into sorting out the will, sorting out the probate before we can distribute the proceeds. Proceeds are paid out via the trust to my daughter. She's got the money. It's there for a reason, to meet the IHT liability. She can pay the IHT liability well before the end of the 6 months, hopefully. So she doesn't get start charged interest. Not only have we met the time limits, but we've also provided the money that they need to pay the IHT liability. They can then concentrate on sorting out probate and getting the money distributed within that will, as was expected in the first place. From Legal and General's point of view, we've got whole of life policies. They are available via our online systems. So I don't know what portals any of you use, so whether you're on iPipeline, IRS, etc., or you do it direct on our own systems via our OLPC, our whole of life is online. It used to be a paper application, but it is online. And of course, it's not just there for IHT. You can use it for family protection. You can use it for business protection. It is just a life cover policy, but one of the most common reasons for using it is for IHT. And then when it comes to putting a policy under trust, because that's the essential part as well, we've got online trusts, as many of you will know. But then when we're looking at the IHT stats from the government, we found that there was over 6,000 estates, which included life policies, that weren't under trust. So potentially 280 million of IHT was paid because those policies weren't under trust. So not only have we got electronic trusts at the new business stage, we've also got them for our existing business policies. So if you come across somebody with an estate or with existing policies that are L&G policies that aren't under trust, you can put them under trust in an electronic way. The advantage of this is you don't need paper applications. There's no need for wet signatures. There's no need for the witness signatures and all the dates that go with it. And invariably somebody will miss a date and we've got to start again. The electronic trusts, totally automated. So in the new business side they're built into the application form. When you get to the trust element, it says you want to do a paper on electronic trust. If you choose electronic, then nice and simple. It's a guided flow, 3 questions. That's the end of your trust debate. Behind the scenes, a system will produce a trust document, much as they're familiar with. It'll put a copy on their online system, on their My Account, so it's there for reference. So it's always there to look back on. But they don't have to go through the whole process of wet signatures and witnesses. If they want to make a change in the future, then there are supplementary forms to make that change. If they want to change trustees and the likes, they can. Those forms are paper forms because they're bespoke to their situation. And similarly with the existing business, from your perspective, from the client's perspective, you're completing an editable PDF and you just email it through to us. We then take over, sort it all out in the background and make sure it's all recorded in the right way. But these processes are so simple that we're now seeing a growth of policies being put under trust in the first place, which is the whole point. Because as Gregor said right at the start, these trusts, their aim is to get the right money in the right hands at the right time. Let's make sure we've got the money there. Let's make sure it's going to help and meet the client's needs. So if we look at a quick example of IHT, we've got a couple own their own house outright, plan to leave the house to the kids in the will, got some additional assets out. Might not be overly realistic, but they've got a house worth 1.1, got some life assurance, isn't under trust, got some cash investments, got some other stuff. So total assets of 1.4 million. Each of them qualifies for a nil rate band, and as they're leaving the house to the kids, they've got that residence nil rate band as well. So in total, 500,000 each. So £1 million of their estate is exempt from IHT. So their assets above £1 million is 400,000. Tax will be applied at 40%, so they'd have to pay, on the death of both of them, 160,000 in IHT. Obvious one to highlight there, though, is that life insurance policy is not under trust. Let's put that under trust, and suddenly we've reduced the IHT by 100,000. That's a really simple piece of advice, isn't it? Now, some of you may have heard of the RISAF principle. So this is where we're starting to get a little bit more complex. And this is really to deal with periodic and exit charges. So the RISAF principle is, it's a legal principle. It has been tested in court. It's come up and down on occasions, but it is still a valid way to find a solution that doesn't impact or isn't impacted with that 10-year periodic or exit charge. So what the RISAF principle does, it takes a larger sum and breaks it down into individual sums that are below the nil rate band of 325,000. And then each of those individual sums are placed under trust, with the trust being on consecutive days. By the trust being on consecutive days, instead of putting £1 million and theoretically having a periodic and exit charge, what you've done in this example here of 4 policies, you've created 4 separate trusts. Each is below the nil rate band, so each would be exempt from a periodic and exit charge, which could be significant because the typical rate for a periodic or an exit charge is 6% of the value of the fund in the trust. By using the Rice-Laff principle, we've avoided that. And it is a valid way of doing it. From an admin process, if you're applying to Legal in General, that's one application online, but it's for 4 policies. The complication or the added admin processes, each one has a separate trust. So that would be 4 trusts. So it's 4 lots of documentation, if you like. But as I say, it's a way of reducing the impact of that periodic and exit charge, which is up to 6% of the value of whatever's in that trust. If we think about what is the value of the policy that we've put in the trust, when does a protection policy actually attract value? We're talking about pure protection policies. These aren't the old whole of life that had an investment element. This is just protection. So actually, it's got no value until there's a claim, or we're at the point of having a person classed as being terminally ill. That's when it starts to attract a value. As I mentioned earlier, people's pension plans are a little bit changed these days. They're not just relying on a pension. It is the investments, the cash, the property on top. So just a little plug for our later life side of things. It's a totally different element of Legal in General. Looking at equity release and the likes. But that's also useful as we start to think about what people use anything that they release from their property for. So they might be taking money out of the house to gift it away. We're back to that gift debate. I'm going to cover gifts in a little bit more detail. They might use it to repay their mortgages or home improvements, or for their retirements, or because they're getting divorced. But the top 3 reasons for equity release, and the number 1 across them, is gifts. Is passing on that money to the next generation. Let's make sure, even if they get advice around equity release, they're not creating a problem with gifts, that we make sure we protect that side as well. Because later life can be really useful as we look at that holistic retirement planning. We can take money out of your house, you've reduced the value of your estate. If your estate's gone down, then potentially your liability for IHT's gone down as well. So it can be a valid tool from an IHT planning point of view, but I'm looking at more of a holistic point of view. Because from a gifts perspective, you can't actually give away everything. Gifts between spouses are exempt. Yep, know that one. But typically you can give away £3,000 a year. Can't give away more than that. Not as a single gift to anybody. Apart from if you're giving money to your kids, in which case you can give £5,000 if it's their wedding. You can make as many gifts below £250 as you like, but that's to cover people buying things like birthday presents, Christmas presents, that kind of thing. And you can give money to charities or political parties. So all of these, if you're giving it away, it's no longer part of your estate. But if you go beyond those limits, then it could be classed as a potentially exempt transfer. So that means for the first 7 years of that transfer of the gift, there's the potential for that to be classed as part of your estate and for IHT to be charged. But the IHT is charged at a sliding scale. So if you're calculating this, you'd have the value of the gift, and then just apply your nil rate band, because it'd always be applied to the gifts first before you look at the rest of their estate. So actually, if somebody gives something away, they may well have used their nil rate band prior to the overall IHT on the rest of their estate. So gifts are really essential as you're calculating what kind of liability people might have. So, quick, simple overview of how that sliding scale would work. So if the person who gives the money away or the value away dies in the first 3 years, then 100% of whatever that gift was would have IHT applied to it if it's above the nil weight band at 40%. As you can see, as you get through the years, it reduces. So you get to year 7, then it's only 20% of the value of the gift will be charged at 40%. So it's a nice sliding scale. So I've got a quick example there. Sam gives away 400,000 in March 2015, passes away in April 2020. So his initial gift, 400,000 above his nil weight band. So that would mean 75%, if he died in that first 3 years, would have the 40% tax rate applied to it. But he's lasted more than 5 years, so we're able to reduce that. So it's 40% of 40%, i.e. it's a 16% tax rate, which on the value of that gift that he gave away in 2015 means an IHT liability for 12,000. And that falls on the recipient of that gift. Don't forget, we've just used the nil weight band on the gift. So if there's a bigger estate, let's say the rest of their estate goes to their kids and that rest of that estate's worth £1 million, we've already used that nil weight band. So that liability will be increased on the rest of the estate. Now, solution to meet that potential need, we have a GIV solution, Gift into Vivos solution from Legal & General. Some companies do individual single policies that are GIV. From L&G's perspective, we do a series of up to 5 term assurances. And they're structured in the way that they will meet that liability. So one policy has a term of 3 years, then 4, 5, 6, 7 years. The advantage of that, one application from your perspective via the online system with the 5 policies. You get the multi-product discount, you've got the online journey so you can see what's going on, single point of underwriting. But when it comes to paying the premiums are actually going to reduce. So after 3 years, that first policy will have run its term. So the premiums will go down, and they go down in year 4, year 5, year 6, etc. Rather than having a level premium throughout. So if you do come across clients who've made gifts, those potentially exempt transfers, we've got a solution to meet that need. Loads and loads of useful resources out there. So I've tried to give you some that aren't just the insurance companies. I think you can all look on our website at Legal & General, but where else can you go? So Money Helper, they're the government guides. But actually, they are quite client friendly. They are quite useful to give you the highlights, which I've already mentioned. You can go on the government website for inheritance tax. Again, they are full of small print, especially as you get into those reliefs like agricultural relief and the likes. But they are still plain English. They are still usable. So even though it's government, it is still usable. And then to start to get into some more obscure stuff, which I'm not going to go into the really obscure stuff today. Look at the likes of the Gazette. It's official public records of the dealings in the government and the likes, and wills and probate notices. There is a complicated scenario where your gifts can end up actually being a liability for 14 years. So your normal simple gifts, your £250 a month, £250 gift to whoever you want, or £3,000 to your kids, or £5,000 on their wedding sort of thing, they're just exempt transfers. Your potentially exempt transfers, that's passing the gift on with the 7-year potential liability sliding scale. But of course, being the government, there's yet other versions. So there's a chargeable lifetime transfer. So this is things like creating a trust fund that's going to pay an income over multiple generations. So you think it's about some of the wealthy, really wealthy landowners, that kind of thing. There is complicated scenarios where theoretically a lifetime transfer, which should run out within 7 years, could continue beyond, and you could well be into a 14-year liability. I would say the times that I've seen that in the last 25 years, yes, maybe 2 or 3 times. So we are talking really obscure inheritance tax, heavy duty planning, which is likely to involve solicitors, and this is your big landed gentry type estates. I guess if we're into those sort of areas, then the complication is just making sure that we fully understand what makes up that estate. For the majority, we've maybe got some gifts and we've maybe got some property. Far more simple to deal with. And of course, the point that it really makes a difference is claims. We've got a whole, I'm not going to pay a claims video, by the way, but we've got a whole page of claims videos. Our latest one is Pete's story. Pete was only 39 and got diagnosed with lung cancer. It's about a 7-minute video, but I would recommend looking at it just from a protection advisor's point of view, not from an IHT point of view, from a protection advisor's point of view, because there's some great lines in there. He talks about who's affected by this diagnosis, what difference it makes to them and their lives. Because it's not just their ability to pay a mortgage, they've got to look after the kids. As he talks through the video, they actually decided, even though they'd taken the policy out to pay the mortgage off, they decided not to use the money for the mortgage. They took the critical illness money and they used it for some experimental treatment, which unfortunately didn't work. They used it to create some memories for the kids. But the key thing is they had a policy which gave them choices and options. Now, neither of them were working at the moment. Again, they had the option to be able to do that. Without a policy, how many of your clients are going to end up regretting with hindsight, going, oh, I wish I'd taken that policy out? Let's make sure they've got that cover in place. Let's make sure they plan for the future. Peter does also go on and talk about when they were looking to economise as they moved house to a new location. But he didn't cancel the policy. Cancelled other things, but not the life insurance, the critical illness. And that's because he realised the value of the relationship he had with the advisor. They made sure they were fully protected. It's the whole point of advice. Let's make sure they've got the right products in place to meet the needs. If they realise the value, then they're not going to start and cancel policies even when they're economising. When it comes to claims, from L&G's point of view, our last claims in 2021 helped almost 17,000 customers. But the really big number at the bottom there, 3.5 billion in the last 5 years. That's just L&G. There's a huge amount of money goes out from the industry, helping all of our clients from all the different insurance companies. It really is a good news message of how much help we're able to give as an industry to all these clients who take out policies. That's the moment of truth. Let's make sure they've got the protection in place to meet that need when it happens. So hopefully the last half hour, 40 minutes or so, giving you a good overview of how IHT works, some of those exemptions, some of the reliefs that can apply. As I say, there's a lot of small print. I can't go through all the small print. We'd be here for hours. But bear in mind, the majority of estates, they're not likely to have all of those reliefs anyway. When you do spot it, you can then get into the detail. Government website does make it clear enough. But the main thing is, we've got some situations where an awful lot of estates are starting to be valued above those nil rate bands. They're starting to create some significant value, especially when there's property involved. If it's over those levels, then we need to start talking about solutions to meet that liability. And this is where we can use those IHT planning policies, whole of lives, the GIV solutions, to put in place some practical solutions so that they're not faced with a demand from HMRC. Lots of support from L&G. I know you'll all be familiar with our website, so it has just changed slightly from that picture, but we've got a detailed website. There's loads of information on there. As Nikki said right at the start, loads of calculators, tools to help you. We've got other calculators on the way, such as a cash flow related one. all the product literature, all the sales aids, all the trust forms, the online trust, the trust flows, diagrams that will take you through what sort of trust form to use. The tools are on there to help you. There is a new section, Find My BDM. So if you are looking to understand who you contact, you could just go on, find your BDM. It'll either take you through to an individual or a phone number. Main thing is you've got somebody to talk to, because we're here to help. And of course, there are underwriting helplines, service teams, they're all there in the background to help and make sure that your policies get in place. I know Gregor highlighted a few of their additional support services. Clearly, I'm going to highlight a few of ours. So every contract that we've got gets wellbeing support. This is access through to the nurses, to the helplines. If you want a bit of support, a bit of second opinion on whether your treatment's correct, talk through some issues, that kind of thing, that's what they're there for. All our income protection plans have rehab support on top. So this is about getting your clients back on their feet. So if they need some extra physio, need some cognitive therapy, mental health support, that kind of thing, that can all be arranged through the rehab support, not through the doctor. It's all separate, arranged privately, but main thing is make that recovery as full as possible. So the rehab, that's free. It's part of your income protection plans. The wellbeing, that's free. It's part of all your policies. Additional cover that they can buy is private diagnostics. So this gives access to the top UK doctors for things like oncology problems, cardiological or neurosurgery. Great addition to your critical illness policy, though. If you've got one of those kind of problems, this enables them to get that diagnosis done quicker. They don't have to wait for the NHS. Refer through to some private doctors if they need additional tests, MRI scans, CT scans. Again, they're not waiting for the NHS to sort it out. It can get done privately. Get the diagnosis done quicker. Once the diagnosis is done, then they're back into their doctor to get their treatment. But just think how much time and pressure that takes off the NHS. And the last one, fracture cover, as the name says, it pays out if you break a bone, dislocation, tear ligaments, etc. Those bottom two, there are additional policies they're paid for. They can only get them at outset when they apply for their new business policies. But you can start and see we're starting to make these products more rounded, bringing those additional features in that are going to help your clients. And finally, we do lots and lots of training, development. I do recognise a few of the names on today. So I know you've been on some of our webinars. We have them on general protection, sales skills. We have specifics on business protection, some technical ones, product specific ones. We do run a series of wealth related ones. So if anybody didn't see last year's session and wants to see that cash flow model in practice, we do have a webinar every month. And coming up shortly, I've got a 2-week series of webinars that'll be late on in February. So they'll be advertised shortly. But they're looking specifically at that wealth opportunity and also into the wider options. So it's a little bit extra release, a bit of annuities, that kind of thing. And we run lots of workshops. But I know you're all familiar with those. So if there's any extra questions popped up, then myself or Nikki, more than happy to answer those.
So I've not seen any come through on the chat box, but obviously if anybody's got any questions they want to raise whilst we're here, then please feel free to do so. Thank you for that, Stuart. Look, a question that I often ask when it comes to these Q&As, and it's me being nosy as much as anything else. There's a lot there in terms of content about kind of what firms can do, the resource that's available. I guess a question for me would be, are there any common themes that you guys see where firms get things not wrong, but maybe, aren't approaching it in the way that you would expect them to be? So some common errors, it's an easy way of putting it, although I don't really want to focus on the error side of things. Equally, are the things that you see done really well that actually, firms can learn from in terms of sharing best practice?
Yeah. Well, if we avoid the errors bit, we'll go with the best practice bit. We'll go with the positives, ignore the negative side of things. But I mean,
sounds good to me.
Yeah, your errors are just the opposite of your positives, aren't they, really? So the advisors who seem to do a really positive job with their clients tend to, in the first place, focus on the need. Let's ignore the product.
This wasn't rehearsed, by the way, everybody.
All right, is it one of your comments as well, is it? So, focusing on the need, because even when I think back years and years ago, when I took out my first mortgage, I saw a mortgage advisor in the bank, got me a reasonable mortgage deal, and he said, you must have policy in place in case the worst happens. You need some life insurance. But I knew no different. I took out a life insurance policy. But that was all the discussion was. All right, fine, that's the box ticked. And clearly now I know that's the box ticked from his perspective. A couple of years later, when I was coming for another mortgage, I didn't bother going back to him. I went to somebody else. We had a long discussion about how you're going to pay for your mortgage. And I'm like, well, I'll get paid. I get a job. And he's like, yeah, well, what happens if you're ill and you can't do your job? What happens if your salary stops? What happens if you get made redundant? It's like, right, yeah, I need a better solution than my life insurance policy because that'll still be there, but it's not going to help me.
It's not going to help. Single
Exactly.
payments, absolutely not.
And at that point, I was in my late 20s and I was single. So what on earth did I need life insurance policy for? But that was that advisor focusing on the need, bringing it to life. I'm sure he had that discussion 101 times, but all he ever talked about was the need. How are you going to meet the need to pay for your mortgage, pay your bills, look after your family? What's going to happen if you have a significant illness? He never talked about the products.
Yep.
From his point of view, it was a bit of an unlucky situation because by that point I worked for an insurance company, so he never actually sold me a policy at the end of the day. But I valued the advice that he gave me. He made it nice and clear. He made me understand what the situation or what the potential problems could be. I took out the policies via the insurance company. It was cheaper. But my mortgages, I went back to him for the next 20 years because he'd given me such good advice. Every time I had the conversation was always, how are you going to make this one? Like, yeah, all right, don't forget, I've got this through work, this through work, this through work. So from my point of view, I was fully protected, but he was prompting me to make sure. Okay. That's the easy one to talk about. Mortgages,
I couldn't agree more.
We all faced...
The products or the solutions are designed to meet the need. Find out what the need is first.
We all face the same thing with our mortgages, but it's just the same if you talk to business clients. Very often, business clients don't think about the what ifs. Challenge people with the what ifs. What's going to happen in your business if you lose your key man? What's going to happen in your business if you lose an owner? What's going to happen if the person that's guaranteed that loan is no longer there? It's a few what ifs because the business owners were going, yep, never thought about it.
No, absolutely. We've got a situation going through right now with one of our clients where he's trying to advise a client, and she's inherited her share of her late husband's business, and is having huge issues with the other directors. Well, the shareholder protection policy would have fixed this, day one, and it's now turning into absolute right. It's horrible, but yeah, it was. So it looks so simple in hindsight, but obviously, either they didn't have an advisor or it wasn't discussed. So there are lots of things that can be done to avoid some real unnecessaries, and obviously providing a really great solution to clients.
And that's the same with the IHT side. The initial start point is, what if you've got an IHT liability? What if the value of your estate is worth more than 500,000 or whatever number you start at? What are you going to do? Do you want to pay the tax man a load of money? Or do you want your beneficiaries to pay that load of money? That's your starting point. Most people wouldn't start with a great big long calculation to work out what the number is. Don't scare people, but go with the positives of those what ifs rather than looking for those who do it wrong. So, back to your first.
Don't be afraid to have those challenging conversations.
Yeah, I mean, it is only a conversation. It feels challenging to us because we're in the industry and we have this question or discussion so often, and we then start talking about death and critical illness and all the statistics and scare stories that go with this. To people outside the industry, they don't have that discussion. I talk to my brother, even though he knows what I do, he's like, yeah, that sounds really boring, I'm not interested. The point that he got interested was when he had 6 months off work. And that's when he said, what was that policy you told me I should have? It's like, yeah, told you, should have in the past. Hard luck. Next time you'll listen to me.
Yeah, a bit late now, sadly.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Look, thank you for that. Just checking, no more questions from anyone else whilst we've got Stuart and Nikki here. No, fab. I've had a couple of people come back to me personally on a few things. So if anybody else wants to pick up individually with any of us speakers today, please feel free to do so. We are more than happy to talk to you on a one-to-one basis about whatever it may be. But thank you to Stuart, Nikki, Gregor, Jazz for running this and running the chat. There will be some feedback forms coming out to you all very shortly if they haven't already, knowing how efficient Jazz is. Please give us the feedback, what make these events real and how we can improve them for you. Once the feedback forms come back, we will be issuing CPD certificates. But any questions, please give us a shout. I will say thank you from me, and hope to see you all and speak to you all soon. Thank you very much. Take care, guys.